Chapter 501. Fearsome Beast Mountain Forest. In Yanjiao, changes were still happening. They weren't interested in the reactions of the other tribes on the mainland, and they didn't have the time to care about anything else. At this time, everyone was staring at the direction of the fire seed. There was only one voice in their minds, and that was the call of the fire seed. The two shamans controlled their power according to the method compiled in their ancestors' notes to control the changes in the fire seed. However, even though they were working together, they were exhausted after persisting for so long. Some of the ancestors' notes after Qi had recorded some possible situations when fusing the fire seed, as well as various deduced solutions. However, at this time, the two shamans were hesitant. Even if they had a backup plan, they were still quite worried. They didn't expect that fusing the fire seed would consume so much power, and the backup plan would also consume a lot of power. Back then, their ancestor, Qi, had used up almost all of his power. Not long after the fusion, he passed away. The two shamans were already mentally prepared and had written their last words before coming over. Just as the two shamans were about to burn their own lives to complete the last step of the fusion, they suddenly felt their bodies lighten. The gap that they couldn't fill was suddenly filled. The two shamans looked over in shock and saw Xiao Xian standing there next to the fire pit. Although he was one step further than the two shamans, the power coming from Xiao Xian's hand was much more abundant than the two shamans. Outside the azure flames, there was a layer of fiery red flame flowing from Xiao Xian's hand to the flames in the fire pit. In fact, Xiao Xian didn't expect this either. His actions just now weren't under his control. He had already stretched out his hand without realizing it. The power of the ancestor. Xiao Xian lowered his head and looked at the 6 bone ornaments hanging in front of his chest. The flames on the ornaments hadn't stopped and were still moving forward. In Xiao Xian's mind, the outer cover of the totemic flames was shining with a white light. The totemic flames inside the cover were burning fiercely, and it was unprecedentedly active. At the same time, the giant flaming saber above the fire pit that seemed to connect heaven and earth began to retract, just like the scene just now. The only difference was that the thick clouds in the sky still maintained the fiery red color. The giant blade that connected the heaven and the earth shrank into a floating flame, which was twice as big as the previous flame. If it was still in the fire pit, it would definitely overflow because the fire pit could no longer contain it. But soon, the flame began to shrink, as if it was condensed. The smaller it was, the brighter it became. When it finally shrunk to the size of a soccer ball, it suddenly emitted a dazzling light. Then, countless sparks shot out from it. It seemed to have no pattern, but if one looked closely, they would find that the sparks that shot out from the air were all aimed at one person with incomparable precision. Xiao Xian was the first to feel this change. He felt a bright light fuse into his body and enter the totem flame in his mind. The totem flame in his body soared, expanded, and shone even brighter. Surging power surged within his body, swimming through his meridians and blood. Excited, the totem flame in his mind seemed to have been added with new firewood, as if a barrel of oil had been poured into it, burning fiercely. The totem flame in his mind was in a state of extreme excitement. If the totem power in his body was like a rolling river in the past, now it was like a vast ocean. This was not a simple change, but a qualitative and quantitative change. The abundant power was boiling in his body, as if steam was erupting from his pores. The airflow around his body was swirling and vibrating, as if countless blades were shooting out from his body. In the windless night, his sleeves and trousers were swaying, and the sound of animal skins or linen being cut could be heard incessantly. The reason why everyone was not required to wear the sacrificial animal clothing was that they considered the changes that might occur during the fusion. Where his feet were pressed against the ground, it seemed that there was a burst of air erupting from there, like layers of waves. The weeds on the ground were shattered, and drifted away with the debris and dust. Xiao Xian could hear the sound of his blood flowing in his body, and the strong beating of his heart. The power of the fire seed merged under his skin, seeped into his bones, and flowed into his blood. His body was strengthened, and when he mobilized his totem power, the totem power flowing in his body became more condensed and wider. The power in his body changed from being passive when the fire seed was fused into his body, and gradually returned to his control, controlling the changes that would follow. The atmosphere was very intimate, and Xiao Xian could see countless flames scattered around in his special vision. It was like seeing delicious food after a starving meal, and Xiao Xian could not wait to absorb these flames. The fire seed had already been dispersed into every Yanjiao's body, and these flames were absorbed along with the fire seed. The more flames he absorbed, the stronger the fire seed in his body. Xiao Xian could clearly feel these changes, just like during the sacrificial ceremony, when everyone absorbed the scattered flames during the flying flame stage. However, after observing the others, Xiao Xian found that this was different from the sacrificial ceremony. The amount of flames he absorbed had nothing to do with the distance from the fire pit. Some people standing at the back even absorbed more than those standing at the front. This change might be related to talent and strength. Everyone had the same fire seed in their body, but their strength might not be the same in the future. Talent, and how much effort they put in, would all make the final result different. How far they could develop, and whether they could make the fire seed in their body stronger, depended on the individual. In the past, he had always thought that the stronger the fire seed, the stronger the person would be. But now that he had truly fused with the fire seed, Xiao Xian found that this was not the case. The stronger the person, the stronger the fire seed. In the days to come, these changes would continue. Where did the dissipated power of the fire seed go? If it still existed between heaven and earth, then they would be able to capture the scattered power again. Perhaps this was what people had always wondered, the growth of the fire seed. At the same time, Xiao Xian noticed another very obvious change. The totemic patterns on the surface of his body had become wider and wider, and the color had changed. The totemic patterns on the people from the old haunt were originally darker, but for those who had fused with the fire seed, their totemic patterns were a brighter lava color. Xiao Xian's totemic patterns were even brighter than theirs. But now, the totemic patterns on everyone's body had changed. It wasn't as dark as the former, nor was it as bright as the latter. Instead, it was a deep purplish black, but it wasn't a pure color. If one were to look closely, they would discover that the patterns were like a layer that covered the flames, blocking out the light. After the complete fusion, the changes in the totemic patterns were more restrained, but they gave off a more dangerous feeling. This was because the totemic patterns were more suitable for the forest. When they covered the entire body, it was more like a hidden protective color. Like the stripes on a beast, like the evolution of a species' survival. The fire in the fire pit that lit up the forest gradually dimmed. The floating flames had disappeared. The fire seed would no longer burn in the fire pit. Seeing such a fire pond, many people felt a sense of loss. But very quickly, they became excited again. They could feel the changes in their bodies. It would make them stronger, and it would also make them live longer. Zheng Luo and the others felt it the most, their eyes burning with passion. From now on, they would no longer be called sick, no longer short-lived ghosts. They could fight for longer in the forest. Their battles would not end here. The flames in the clouds in the sky gradually weakened, and everything on the ground returned to darkness. Looking at the fire pit that no longer had any light, the shamaness knelt and kowtowed. The others followed suit, using the tribe's highest ceremony to pay tribute to the departing fire seed. From now on, they would usher in a new era. This day would leave a deep mark in Yanjiao's history. This day would be marked as Yanjiao's Memorial Day for the fire seed. Every year on this day, a ceremony would be held to commemorate the fire seed's change. This was the most important day after the ceremony at the beginning of each year. Yanjiao will return to its peak. The glory they had lost would be reclaimed. As for the Yanjiao wanderers who left, when they abandoned the Yanjiao tribe, they lost their chance to rejoin the fire seed. The changes in Yanjiao were naturally felt by the shamans of each tribe. How could this be? The shaman of the Mang tribe was shocked. He lost his composure. What's wrong? What happened to the Yanjiao tribe? The chief of the Mang tribe asked quickly. Although he could feel the changes, he did not have the sensitivity of the shaman. The flaming horn's fire seed has disappeared. The Mang shaman's voice was shaking. He was shocked to the core. Disappeared? How is that possible? The chief of the Mang tribe almost jumped in shock. Yes, how was that possible? No matter how useless the Yanjiao tribe was, it was impossible for their fire seed to be extinguished so quickly. Moreover, the changes just now did not seem like the fire seed was extinguished. The chief of the Mang tribe felt that it was impossible. No, it's not really gone. It's still here, but it exists in a different way. The shaman's voice was almost inaudible. He was deep in thought. Not only the shamans of the Mang tribe, but the other tribes were also shocked. However, the shamans of these tribes were not the only ones who were shocked. In the desert, in the expanded Rock Hill city, a similar conversation was taking place. Did you feel it? The fire seed is abnormal. Yes, they have found a way to rejoin the fire seed. If they were only suspicious when they heard the news from the Yanjiao tribe, now they were 100% sure. The Yanjiao tribe is really a magical tribe. Shi Shu looked in the direction of the Flaming Horns tribe, but quickly shifted his line of sight to the other side, in the direction of the sea. The world will change. What we can do is to gain more bargaining chips before it changes, said a voice whose age could not be determined. Chapter 502. The fusion of the fire seed required time to get used to it, to fully absorb the energy that was not fully absorbed. Hence, in the next 2 days, the tribe was much quieter. Other than the warriors on patrol duty, everyone else stayed in their own houses to continue the fusion process. Xiao Xian did not know how much the others had changed, but he knew his own and Old Ku's changes. These 2 days, Old Ku seemed to have nowhere to vent his energy. He could spend the whole night in the stone house, and the next day, he would cook meat soup and roast beast legs. In the past, Old Ku had to use crutches to move around, and Caesar had to carry him if he wanted to walk further. Now, Old Ku threw away his crutches and jumped around the house, jumping around energetically. Xiao Xian was worried that Old Ku would get tired from jumping around, but Old Ku enjoyed it. This is really good, don't you believe me? If you don't believe me, I'll show you every day. You look much more energetic now, you look radiant. Xiao Xian smiled. Xiao Xian was not trying to flatter him. Old Ku used to have more white hair, but now he had more black hair, and only a small part of his hair was white. If he took good care of his hair, Xiao Xian was not sure if his hair would turn completely black one day. The smile on Old Ku's face started to pile up. After the fusion of the fire seed, Old Ku had changed a lot. In the past, Old Ku's health was not good. He had lost a leg while hunting, and later, he made a living by making stone tools. His life was not good, and he was sick. Although Xiao Xian had been collecting herbs for him to recover, it was not as obvious as the fusion of the fire seed. The others did not change as much as Old Ku. No matter what, a good change was always gratifying. After breakfast, Xiao Xian went out and bumped into Duo Kong and the others. Duo Kong and Guang Yi were talking about totemic patterns. I still have a lot of colored mud. I didn't expect that after the complete fusion of the fire seed, I wouldn't need to use it at all. In the future, I won't need to use it when I hunt. Although there was one less problem, Duo Kong still couldn't get used to it. He packed his things and prepared for the hunt the day after tomorrow. He kept feeling like something was missing. TSK, but they had to get used to it. Although the totem runes were not as bright as before, they knew that these runes were the most suitable for hunting among the 3 runes. Before Guang Yi could say anything, Duo Kong continued, actually, after a while, it's pretty good. I heard that this entire forest is ours. In the future, we won't have to worry about intruding into other people's territory. We can hunt freely, ha ha ha. Guang Yi shook his head, ignoring the overly excited Duokong. He clasped his hands behind his back and planned to find someone else to spar with. He hadn't moved for 2 days, his hands were itchy. They had to wait until the day after tomorrow to go hunting. Xiao Xian walked around to see how everyone was adapting. Without the fire seed, the people of the old haunt felt a bit strange. They gazed at the fire pit without any light from afar with a disappointed and frustrated expression. They felt that without the fire seed, it was as if they had lost their roots. But in order to walk towards a brighter future, this change had to be made. Plus, people were the foundation of the tribe. As long as the people were there, the hearts were there. Everything was there, no matter where they lived in the future. After walking for a while, Xiao Xian walked towards the fields. When they came back from the other side of the sea, they brought back many seeds. They were all good seeds given to them by Ji Ju. In the past, Xiao Xian always thought that they only ate normal food. Later, he found out that many tribes, especially the bigger ones, had some precious seeds. However, they protected them very tightly, as if they were afraid that others would find out. Even if they traded, they rarely took them out. Most of the seeds that the trading teams brought back were normal seeds. The food they grew was basically for the people in the tribe who hadn't awakened their totemic power. But now, the seeds they brought back were different. The ones in charge of planting were still Chi and the others. They were familiar with it. The people in charge of planting also learned from them. In the future, the tribe's fields would definitely expand. If they didn't learn quickly, they wouldn't have enough manpower. Seeing Xiao Xian, Chi hurried over and bowed respectfully. She respected Xiao Xian from the bottom of her heart. Without Xiao Xian, they wouldn't have been able to come to the old haunt. Grand Elder! Grand Elder! The others hurried over. In the past, Xiao Xian was the only elder. Now, he was the Grand Elder. Although he was still the only elder, it wouldn't be long before there would be more elders in the tribe. The two shamans had already discussed that after training Guizhe, they would step down. After all, there would always be conflicts between the two shamans. Not to mention their views, they would often quarrel over how they addressed each other. Sometimes, when they heard people call them shaman, they would respond and misunderstand each other. The old lady wanted the old man to change the way he addressed her. The male shaman on the other side of the sea was called Wu. She wanted the old man to just call her Wu. Unfortunately, the old man refused. Why should he change the way he addressed her? It's a name passed down from our ancestors. Why did he have to learn from the slave masters? He wouldn't change it. The old lady was so angry that she almost hit him with her cane. Other than these small conflicts, they felt that at their age, they were lucky to be able to live for a few more years with the fire seed fusion. It was time for them to step down. It was time for the young people to take up the mantle. The two of them would step down as elders. Ever since the fire seed fusion, Guizhe had inherited the power of inheritance and was valued by the old lady. Perhaps it was because he had been learning from the shamans for a long time, or because he was talented. It was rare for the two shamans to have the same attitude in training their successors. Sometimes, they would disagree and quarrel. So now, Guizhe was running between the two sides. Today, he would learn from the old man, and tomorrow, he would go to the old lady. The pharmacy was handed over to other people. Xiao Xian also went to help when he had time. He taught the new apprentices in the pharmacy. The alligator snapping turtle grew bigger. It ate and slept every day. Although it ate medicinal waste, it grew well. Xiao Xian wanted to pry the turtle shell off and make it into armor. As for the chiefs, the two chiefs didn't step down for the time being. However, they also said that when the new chiefs came out, they would step down and become elders like the shamans. They would only participate in the discussion of the tribe's important matters and wouldn't care about anything else. The new leader would be chosen from the 3 team leaders. That was why Duokong, Guihe, and Ta were doing their best to perform. The reason why Duo Kong was looking forward to the hunt was because he wanted to show his strength as soon as possible. Although there would be 4 more elders soon, Xiao Xian's special position was still unsurpassed. So, the Grand Elder was chosen. He was also the only elder who could control 6 bone ornaments. The other elders didn't have any ornaments. This was different from the past. Even if Xiao Xian took out the 6 ornaments to share, the others wouldn't want them. They couldn't light up the ornaments before and felt that they didn't have the right to wear them. No one wanted to challenge the Grand Elder's position. So now, when the people in the tribe saw Xiao Xian, they would call him Grand Elder. Xiao Xian looked at the situation in the field. How much did we plant? We planted everything suitable for this season. Chi brought Xiao Xian around the field and told him about the results. Chi went to the shamans to collect the seeds. The 2 shamans divided the work. The old man was in charge of the seeds and the old woman was in charge of the salt. They brought a lot of seeds when they came. When the Guizhe took over, the 2 shamans would give the seeds to the Guizhe for safekeeping. At first, the shamans thought that Xiao Xian was the one who got the seeds, so Xiao Xian should be the one keeping the seeds. However, Xiao Xian would go hunting with the hunting team. Even if he wasn't hunting, he wouldn't sit in the house all day waiting for people to find him. Other than the people working in the fields, there were also many people working in the animal pen. The 2 teams often gathered to exchange their experiences. When Xiao Xian went over, the person who took care of the duck shed was still regretting that he didn't bring the green ducks over. Xiao Xian was about to check on the wild boars that he had caught during the hunt a few days ago. Xiao Xian heard someone calling him and looked over. It was the 2 chiefs and the 3 team leaders. Were the 5 of them gathered together to discuss something? What are you going to do? Xiao Xian walked over and asked. Ao didn't say anything. He just tilted his head slightly in one direction. Xiao Xian understood. That direction was where the core seed was placed. The core seed was a secret in the tribe. Even the metal objects they brought back were mostly put aside. Duo Kong even played with stone axes to his heart's content. He always thought that stones were too easy to break. How could he hunt? But ever since he saw Xiao Xian use stone tools, Duo Kang's impression changed. When he came here, he understood the wonders of stone tools better. Xiao Xian didn't ask Tuo and Lei to bring the core seed back to hide it. Come, let's go take a look. Ao called Xiao Xian. The 6 of them walked over. Because the core seed was too dangerous, it was placed far from the tribe. It would take some time to get there. On the way, Ao thought for a moment and asked, Xian, do you feel that when you eat the 1,000-grain gold, the fire seed's power in your body fuses faster? Ao ate the 1,000-grain gold later than the others, but because of this, the feeling was even clearer. Xiao Xian really didn't feel it. Perhaps he was different from the others. The shamaness once said that Xiao Xian was different from the others, whether it was his awakening or the appearance of his totemic patterns. So what the others felt, Xiao Xian might not be able to. He looked at the others. Zheng Luo, Duo Kong, Ta and the others all agreed. Xiao Xian thought back to Ji Zhu's words. That should be it. Ji Zhu once said that the 1,000-grain gold would grow in the most suitable direction. Perhaps because we need this change, it will grow in this direction. It comes from the same plant as the 1,000-grain gold in Ji Zhu's place. But its growth is very different because it grows in Yanjiao land. 1,000-grain gold, what a magical thing. Ao sighed. They didn't have to envy the other tribes for their precious crops. Their tribe had more treasures, especially the 1,000-grain gold. It was the treasure of their tribe. They wouldn't share it with others. Even if they offered more in exchange, they wouldn't give it to them. Chapter 503. Not long after leaving the tribe, Xiao Xian saw the mountains where Cha used to rest. There were still scratches left by the eagle's claws on the mountain walls. When Cha-Cha first came to the old haunt, it preferred high places and didn't like to be surrounded by people. After all, it didn't have much contact with the Yanjiao people, unlike the other ferocious beasts. It had encircled several mountains around the tribe. When Xiao Xian came back, he didn't see Cha-Cha. He learned from Ao that Cha-Cha flew around the desert after sending Tuo and Lei back to the old haunt. Then it ran to the Hui tribe and took away a few of their eagles. However, the people of the Hui tribe also said that the giant mountain eagles were probably going to Eagle Mountain in a group, so Ao and the others were not too worried. They didn't know much about the giant mountain eagles, but Cha-Cha had been there once and had experience. Although they didn't know which path they were going to take, since they were all in a group, it should be safe. Not long after this winter, the traveling team of the Hui tribe from the grassland came to the ferocious beasts' mountain forest. They also sent a message that several eagles of their tribe had returned, but they didn't see Cha-Cha. They didn't say much, as if they wanted to say something but stopped. Ao didn't think much about it because of the strange fire seed. They went to Eagle Mountain but didn't appear with the other eagles. Did they not leave Eagle Mountain? Or did they leave Eagle Mountain and go somewhere else? Xiao Xian didn't know. When Xiao Xian asked about it, Ao regretted it. After all, they didn't ask much at that time. The people of the Hui tribe didn't stay here for long and left with a message. If Xiao Xian wanted to figure it out, he had to go to the grassland and ask the people of the Hui tribe in detail. The communication between the people of the Hui tribe and the giant mountain eagles was very normal. They could understand the meaning of the giant mountain eagles. It was impossible for several eagles to go together without any news. The people of the Hui tribe definitely knew more about Cha-Cha. Xiao Xian didn't blame Ao and the others. After all, the situation was special. Besides, Cha-Cha had a bad temper. In the tribe, other than the old Ku and the shaman, it didn't want to talk to anyone else, let alone talk to them. When things here were settled, Xiao Xian planned to go to the grassland. After about half an hour, Xiao Xian could feel some changes. When you asked Tuo and Lei to bring the core seed back, we knew it was very dangerous, but we didn't expect it to be so lethal. Ao pointed at the thinning forest in front of them. Due to the soil and stone of this mountain, there weren't many plants. The higher they went, the less greenery there was. This was why Ao decided to put the core seed here. But it was so sparse, it was like a bald patch in the forest. It was frightening. There were not many plants here, and it was even rarer to see ferocious beasts on the mountain. Ao had been here many times. Occasionally, he could see one or two pheasants passing by below the mountainside. They did not live on this mountain, but came from other mountains. The core seed was placed on the mountain. There were originally some small caves, but we expanded them and put some good stones inside. Ao told Xiao Xian everything in detail. Zheng Luo and Duo Kong listened on the side. Their faces were red, and they looked like they wanted to rush over immediately. It was obvious that they weren't calm at all. On the other side of the sea, the core seed was controlled by the slave masters. All the bronze wares they had were bought from the slave masters or traded with merchants. They had never seen the core seed before. They didn't even know about the core seed, only vaguely aware of it. However, they thought it was too far away, so they didn't pay much attention to it. They didn't expect there to be a core seed in the old haunt. With the core seed, will we be able to make more gold wares? Duo Kong rubbed his hands in anticipation. Technically, yes. But no one in the tribe has tried it before. We don't know if it'll work. We'll have to try, answered Xiao Xian. When they were on the other side of the sea, the tribe's blacksmiths only modified weapons based on bronze wares. Even though Gong Jiaheng had taught them some techniques, he had never explained smelting techniques based on ores. The Yanjiao tribe could only use the theories Xiao Xian had provided. Xiao Xian's smelting techniques were a combination of the slave master's smelting techniques and the words he had taken from Gongjia Mountain. Back in the desert, Xiao Xian had snuck into Snowfield City and read about smelting in the place where the ancient scrolls were kept. Not only did it talk about the core seed, it also explained where the ores used for smelting came from. It also mentioned that the better the quality of the ores, the shorter the smelting time and the higher the metal content. Xiao Xian had recorded the slave master's failures and their successes. As for the words he had taken from Gongjia Mountain, they were very useful too. For example, there was the method of observing qi, the ratio of different metals used in smelting weapons, and the ring diagrams left behind by the Yi family's ancestors. The others did not understand the Yi family's ring diagrams, so they did not read them. However, the techniques and experiences mentioned earlier made the two chiefs and the three team leaders' eyes light up. I've heard from the Gongjia family that there's a type of green-faced fanged beast whose blood is very useful in making weapons. The swords it makes can easily cut through stone, said Xiao Xian. Really? The others looked at Xiao Xian. I've heard about it. I've never seen it with my own eyes. What does the green-faced fanged beast look like? We can't let it go when we hunt in the future, asked Zheng Luo impatiently. The metal wares they used were not the best. Most of the metal wares they used were not even as good as the high-quality stone wares in the old haunt. However, whether it was the metal wares they used or the stone wares used in the old haunt, they all had many shortcomings. However, if these shortcomings could be improved, they would be able to make better metal wares, which would make it easier for them to hunt and more confident, which would be very satisfying. According to Heng, the green-faced fanged beast isn't big. It has a green face and thick skin. It has hooves but no horns and 2 long fangs. It often jumps around the mountains and looks very fierce. It's also very aggressive and often attacks other beasts. It's a herbivorous beast. As Xiao Xian spoke, the 5 of them did the same thing at the same time. They searched for animal skins or cloth to write down. Duo Kong found a piece of cloth but did not bring a pen or paint. He scratched his head and said to Zheng Luo, "Boss, I'll copy after you write it down." Zheng Luo looked up at him but did not speak. "Don't worry, there's no rush. I'll fill in what I missed when we get back," said Xiao Xian as he continued walking up the mountain. There were very few plants growing on the ground here. However, there were a few types of unknown grasses. They didn't look very conspicuous. If they were placed together with other flowers and plants, they would be easily overlooked. However, here, when other plants couldn't survive, they were still standing strong. Xiao Xian went over to pick some. He would study them when he got back. If they could withstand the core seed's influence and still grow here, they might be a rare medicine. It might be useful against the core seed's damage. It's there. Ao pointed ahead. There was a cave blocked by a large rock. There were no guards around the cave because the guards were all at the foot of the mountain. That way, they could avoid harm. Even if it was just a small injury, it would be a big problem in the long run. Plus, there were no other tribes in this forest. Other than the fearsome beasts, there were no other outsiders. There was no need to be so strict. The closer they got to the cave, the more danger they felt. It was uncomfortable and their bodies were emitting danger signals. Zheng Luo and Duo Kong were not used to seeing the core seed for the first time, but they could not suppress their excitement. Core seed, it was the core seed. Ao walked over and removed the stone that was blocking the entrance of the cave. However, he did not go in immediately. Instead, he opened a large animal skin bag that he had brought along. "Put this on." Xiao Xian took a simple gray robe from Ao. It was made of worm skin. Xiao Xian brought back 3 rolls of worm skin from Eagle Mountain. He only used one and left the other 2. After Tua brought the core seed back, he followed Xiao Xian's instructions and found the worm skin to make these protective clothes. At that time, the soldiers who moved the stones in were all wearing these clothes. The 6 of them put on the clothes and walked in. There were some glowing water moon stones in the long passage. They did not need a torch to see what was inside. As they continued to walk, they arrived at a place with a larger space. It was circular in shape. Ao and the other warriors had worked hard to excavate this space back then. It was man-made. The core seed was in the middle. It was not much bigger than a fist but was extremely dangerous. That's the legendary core seed. Zheng Luo's throat twitched. He wanted to touch it but knew it was too dangerous. The closer he got, the more he felt a burning pain in the places not covered by the worm skin. There were stones around the core seed. The tribe spent a lot of time looking for stones in the forest. It was rare that they did not use the good stones to make stone tools. Instead, they moved most of them here. Xiao Xian looked around. Using the results from the ring diagram, he walked to a spot and looked at the stones. At this spot, the stones were the same distance away from the core seed. Many of them had irregular gold on their surfaces. This was where the core seed had the most copper. This was where the copper mine was produced. The magical core seed. They moved some of the copper ore out of this location, and then moved out a large stone from a different location, bringing all these stones back to the tribe. Chapter 504. It was night time when the 6 of them returned. They purposely waited for the tribesmen to rest before carrying the stones back. Because the smelting process was still in the experimental stage, they didn't know if it would succeed, so they didn't announce it yet. The next day, Zheng Luo's blacksmiths arrived. According to the slave master's requirements, they were just regular blacksmiths, but to the tribesmen, they were masters, so everyone called them Master XX. The blacksmiths blushed and waved their hands, saying they weren't skilled enough to be considered masters. Ever since they met Gongjiaheng, they didn't dare call themselves masters anymore. They were much more humble now. This time, Xiao Xian called them over to talk about smelting ores. They had already seen the theory behind it. A stone room for smelting ores was built at the edge of the tribe. The stones the 6 of them brought back yesterday were all placed inside. There were many guards around the stone room. Other than the chief, the leader and Xiao Xian's group, no one else was allowed to get close. Xiao Xian brought the blacksmiths over so the guards could recognize them. Zheng Luo's people aside, the people here weren't familiar with the blacksmiths. From now on, the 5 of them will be the blacksmiths here. They can enter the stone room freely, Xiao Xian said to the guards. After carefully memorizing the faces, voices and other characteristics of the 5 people, the guard nodded. They were assigned to such an important task, of course they had to treat it seriously. Ores, they wanted to have ores too. They had to prepare a smelting furnace, charcoal and other ores to be used as catalysts. These things were used for a few days, so when Duo Kong and the rest went out to hunt, they didn't see the stone room open. Xiao Xian had thought about smelting ores too. Even if he didn't know about ores, he could use the circular diagram to calculate the location of the ores. However, iron was harder to smelt than copper and there weren't many records on smelting ores. Xiao Xian didn't dare to try. No one knew what would happen to the core seed. Rice had to be eaten one bite at a time. It was better to smelt ores first. Good bronze wares were not inferior to others. Xiao Xian and the 5 blacksmiths smelted the copper ores in the stone room. They followed the Gongjia ancestors' method of observing the air and smelting. Then, they calculated the most suitable metal ratio to forge a copper sword. It was simple in theory but not in practice. There were too many factors that could change the outcome. If everyone could easily make a good bronze weapon, the Gongjia family would not be in such a high position. On this day, when Xiao Xian and the other craftsmen were experimenting again, someone came to report that people from the Lu tribe had arrived. The shaman said that if Xiao Xian was free, he should go over. There was no need for Xiao Xian to keep an eye on the work at hand. In the past few days, the other craftsmen had already gained experience. They picked up the work faster than Xiao Xian. After all, they had been exposed to this kind of thing for a long time. Even if they had just started smelting ores, they learned very quickly. Xiao Xian was also relieved to leave the work to them. All right, I'll be right there. Xiao Xian sent the messenger back first, then said a few words to the 5 craftsmen in the stone room. He came out to wash his face before heading over. The Lu and Yanjiao tribes had been trading. Every year, the Lu tribesmen would visit 2 to 3 times. Sometimes, they were here to deliver baby beasts. Other times, they were invited by the Yanjiao tribe to teach them. After a few exchanges, the relationship between both parties was considered harmonious. The person who led the team this time was Yanjiao, someone Xiao Xian knew. It had been a long time since they last met. Yanjiao had always thought that something had happened to Xiao Xian. When he heard that Xiao Xian had returned to the tribe, he especially wanted to talk to Xiao Xian. The Lu tribe could start trading with the Yanjiao tribe because of Xiao Xian. Ha, Xiao Xian, long time no see. Yanjiao looked at Xiao Xian and laughed loudly. Indeed, long time no see. How's your tribe? Xiao Xian asked. Not bad. We've been robbed a few times. Speaking of this, Yanjiao's smile faded. The Wanchur people? Xiao Xian asked. Yes, other than the Wanchur people, there are also the slaves of the slave masters. But they only robbed us once. Yanjiao was depressed. In the past, there was only the Wanchur tribe here. After the incident in the desert, the slave masters came out and there was one more problem. Fortunately, the slave masters mainly focused on recuperation. They didn't jump out to make enemies. They were also worried that the other major tribes would target them and rob them of their last stock. Even so, Yanjiao and the others didn't dare to come here often. It wasn't easy to come to the Yanjiao tribe. The Lu tribe didn't bring many things each time they came here. The Yanjiao tribe didn't trade large amounts of adult animals from them anymore. But this time, I didn't see anyone from the Wanchur tribe. What happened to them? Yanjiao asked. In the past, when they came here, they would always see some small groups of the Wanchur tribe. Today, they didn't see any of them. Who knows what they're thinking? Xiao Xian shook his head. Right, I heard that your tribe has a lot of new people. Yanjiao asked the first key question of the day. Yes, they were separated from the previous tribe. Now they're back. Which tribe lost more than 4,000 people at once? Yanjiao thought Xiao Xian didn't want to answer, so he asked another question. What happened to your tribe a few days ago? Why do I feel that the fire seed of your tribe seems? Yanjiao didn't want to say the word, gone. After all, for the tribesmen, such words were like curses. It was very unfriendly. The fire seed of our tribe just changed a little. You noticed it too? Xiao Xian was surprised. The Lu tribe was still some distance away from them. Of course we noticed it. Not only us, but other tribes also know that something happened to you. The Lu tribe was a nice tribe, and they were close to Yanjiao. So after that day, people came to them one after another to inquire about what happened. Hearing Yanjiao's words, Xiao Xian guessed that some people couldn't wait and would come to them soon. Before, it was because of the conflicts between the other tribes and Yanjiao. But since it was related to the fire seed, those people might come shamelessly. If they came to them, what would they do about the fire seed? Yanjiao chatted with Xiao Xian for a long time before leaving. They were annoyed by the other tribe's questions, and they were curious, so they came here. They couldn't ask about the secrets of the other tribes, but Yanjiao could feel the difference in the Yanjiao tribe. The fire seed of Yanjiao seemed to be gone, but also seemed to be still there. It was just not obvious. Strange Yanjiao people. Fortunately, although the Lu tribesmen were curious, they weren't very curious. If they couldn't figure it out, they stopped thinking about it and went on with their lives. They never fought with others for anything. As long as it didn't harm the interests of the Lu tribe, they didn't care. After Yan Jiu left with his people, Xiao Xian went to the two shamans to discuss the fire seed. They discussed how to answer if those people came to them. The Yanjiao tribe could close their doors and not see anyone, but those people wouldn't give up easily. They might even use all kinds of tricks. It wasn't that they were afraid of them, but they had to be prepared. They didn't want to panic when something happened. The tribe was big, and many things had to be arranged in advance. However, the Wanshi tribe and the slave masters who escaped from the desert were indeed a big trouble. After all, they were close to here and had bad intentions. This nail had to be pulled out as soon as possible. Xiao Xian touched the knife in his hand and thought. Xiao Xian wasn't the only one who thought this way. The two chiefs had discussed it many times in private. It was just that Zheng Luo's people had just arrived and weren't used to it yet. Plus, they had merged with the fire seed, so they might not be in their best fighting condition. They just needed time. After going out to hunt once or twice and practicing more, they might be able to adjust their condition. At that time, the complete Yanjiao tribe, the new Yanjiao tribe, would be tested on the Wanshi tribe and the slave masters. A few days later, the first batch of hunters who went out to hunt after the merging of the fire seed returned. Looking at them, they adapted well and brought back a lot of prey. The results were good. Duo Kong didn't care about that. He was competing with Gigu and Ta, but this time, he didn't pay attention to how much prey they brought back. Instead, he paid attention to the green-faced fanged beast Xiao Xian mentioned before. When Xiao Xian saw the prey the three team leaders brought back, his facial muscles twitched uncontrollably. There were all sorts of strange-looking sheep, deer, cows and so on. But none of them matched the characteristics of the green-faced fanged beast. In other people's eyes, the three team leaders really had unique hobbies. Xiao Xian, these aren't the same. Duo Kong asked expectantly. According to the description, none of them fit the description, said Xiao Xian helplessly. The three team leaders showed obvious disappointment in their eyes. Duo Kong thought for a moment, then asked, can it only be the green-faced fanged beast? Can't it be other red-faced fanged beasts or white-faced fanged beasts? Actually, there are other fearsome beasts that can do it, but those are the Gongjia family's secret techniques. I've never seen them before and they might not be as effective as the green-faced fanged beast. However, there is one that can beat the green-faced fanged beast. I've seen it before. What is it? The three team leaders craned their necks like chickens waiting to be slaughtered. Stone worms, said Xiao Xian. That's easy. Ta grinned. Anything above the fearsome beast level, continued Xiao Xian. Ta fell silent. They had never seen fearsome beast-level stone worms before. Even if they did, they wouldn't emerge from the ground. They couldn't possibly dig into the ground to look for them, could they? The worms would probably run away before they could dig anything up. It would be extremely difficult. As for king-level beasts, Zheng Luo and the rest didn't dare to take the risk. Wouldn't that be suicide? Then let's look for the green-faced fanged beast. I don't believe we can't find one in this entire forest. Duo Kong didn't look at the prey anymore. He ran towards the smelting room. Gigu and Ta followed suit. They were equally anxious. To them, metal was a new experience. Watching them leave, Xiao Xian pondered. There were no green-faced fanged beasts or stone worms. Were there any other suitable fearsome beasts? The Gongjia ancestors couldn't have tried every type, right? Chapter 505. Xiao Xian purposely picked some ferocious beast's blood and tried to use it when refining bronzes. To him, using beast blood to refine weapons was indeed inconceivable, but in this place, there were many inconceivable things. According to the Gongjia ancestors, the impurities had to be removed from the ores. Then, they had to carefully control the temperature and observe the melting gas. After the black gas, yellow and white gas, and as the temperature of the furnace continued to rise, green flames would appear. Then, green and white gas would appear. When the metal was completely melted and only green gas was left, the next step was to mix beast blood with the casting process. Xiao Xian had experimented with many types of beast blood. He even made small molds and used them sparingly. After all, this was just an experiment. The tribe did not have many copper ores yet, they could not afford to waste too much. Unfortunately, the final result was still very depressing. The ancestors of the Gongjia family mixed beast blood into their bronze wares to strengthen them. However, not only did the blood fail to strengthen the bronze wares, it even destroyed the integrity of the bronze wares. It was easy to break. The tribe had hunted many fearsome beasts in the forest but none of them worked. Not even the slightest bit. Either they were using the wrong method or they had not found the right blood source. Back then, the Gongjia ancestors had discovered the method of using blood to refine swords. It was extremely difficult, or perhaps they were extremely lucky. So, not all of them can be used. When Xiao Xian showed his results to the chiefs and team leaders, all 5 of them were disappointed. However, sometimes, one could not be too demanding. To be able to obtain these copper ores and successfully refine weapons was already very exciting. One step at a time. While Xiao Xian and the chiefs were experimenting with beast blood, some unwelcome guests arrived. There were 15 of them. They were from the Mang tribe, 8 Limbs tribe and Feather tribe. These 3 tribes were considered the 3 largest tribes in the central region. Other than the Mang, 8 Limbs and Feather tribes, there were also the 1,000 Masks and Longbow tribe in the central region, as well as the Hui tribe and Tianshan tribe in the grasslands. This was 7 of them. Although the Wanshu tribe was also listed as one of the 8 tribes, this was not true. If it were not for the many slave owners standing behind them, they would not have the status they had today. They would have been destroyed by the other big tribes. People from other small and medium-sized tribes were afraid of the Wanshu tribe. After all, the Wanshu tribe was known for its bad behavior. People could only feel lucky that the Wanshu tribe was not located in the central region where the tribes were the densest and the soil was the most fertile. Later, when Yanjiao appeared, many people still had the idea of watching a good show. They wondered when the 2 tribes would fight, but they didn't expect that the 2 tribes would be in a deadlock until now. Many people were still discussing how Wanshu's people could endure until now. Was it because they didn't want to make a move? Or was it because they couldn't? The people of the Yanjiao tribe didn't know, nor were they interested in knowing. Xiao Xian knew the 3 leaders of the 3 tribes, Wang Yi of the Mang tribe, Qiu Gu of the 8 Limbs tribe, and Gu Ji of the Feather tribe. It was probably because these 3 people had been to the Yanjiao tribe before and still remembered this place, so they were allowed to come this time. As Xiao Xian expected, these 3 people first went to the Lu tribe and asked the people of the Lu tribe about what happened here. After Yan Jiu and the others of the Lu tribe returned, in order to get satisfactory results and not to return empty-handed, they could only come to the Yanjiao tribe again. In fact, when they went to the desert to find the Yanjiao people, they were just curious and thought it was no big deal to bring 3 people along. When they arrived at the desert, they completely ignored Xiao Xian and the others. Later, they didn't expect such a big change in the desert. When they ran, they didn't see Xiao Xian and the others, so they didn't look for them. Huang Yi left a letter and left the desert with the others. After that, Yanjiao and the 7 major tribes basically lost contact. Except for the Hui tribe who came twice because of the Cha-Cha, the other tribes never set foot in this place again. This time, there was no other way. When they came near the fearsome beast forest, the people of the 3 major tribes also felt the difference. Other than the Wanshu tribe that Yan Jiu told them didn't appear, they could also feel the difference in the Yanjiao tribe. When they came last time, although they could clearly feel the rejection of the Yanjiao fire seed, they were already used to it. The major tribes in the central region often interacted with each other, so after a long time, they didn't think much of it. But it was different this time. The rejection of the fire seed was very small, or even non-existent, but they still felt uncomfortable all over. It was even worse than the last time they came. Is it really because of the fire seed? Huang Yi thought about what their shaman said. Was the fire seed of the Yanjiao tribe really gone? The eight limbs Chilgu, who always had a smile on his face, had a serious look on his face. There was no smile on his face at all. His narrowed eyes flashed with deep thought. It seems that the Yanjiao tribe has many secrets. I just don't know if they can reveal any of this secret. Guji of the Feather tribe sighed. With the previous experience, they didn't let the birds that followed them run around. The group of 15 people came on the Feather tribe's birds. These birds were very uneasy when they arrived at the fearsome beast forest. If it weren't for the Feather tribe's people trying their best to calm them down, they would have flown away long ago. Birds that were used to other places in the central region might not be able to adapt to the atmosphere here. More importantly, the people hiding in the forest didn't like them. These birds could feel the other party's attitude. The patrolling soldiers received the order and reluctantly led these people into the tribe. In the past, they really wanted to interact with these people more, especially when they first came to the old haunt. They were curious about people and things, and wanted to get to know more people from other tribes. Unfortunately, these people didn't seem very enthusiastic. Plus, after what happened in the desert, the soldiers didn't smile at them. They were even on guard. This time, the 15 people who entered the Yanjiao tribe didn't have as much freedom as last time. They were watched along the way. They were led directly to the stone house where they would meet the guests. Although they couldn't see what the other places were like, Huang Yi and the others noticed that there were many more houses here. They were more densely packed, and the arrangement of the houses wasn't messy either. It was as if they had been specially planned. It didn't seem like a disaster had happened in the Yanjiao tribe. Most people were in a good mood. So, the speculation about a disaster in Yanjiao was dismissed first. Of course, this was secondary. Huang Yi and the others realized that what scared them the most was the feeling the Yanjiao warriors gave them. They felt like something was wrong, but they couldn't put their finger on it. After all, they weren't shamans and weren't sensitive to the changes in the fire seed. In addition to the 2 shamans, the 2 chiefs and 3 team leaders also came to meet these people. Xiao Xian also stopped what he was doing and walked into the house. Last time when the 2 sides had a meeting, Ta and Gigu were standing. But this time, they were sitting down like Duo Kong. There was no need to be polite to these people. Huang Yi and the others looked at the people sitting across the stone table. They had a good memory, but they didn't have any impression of the 3 extra people this time. This time, we are also here to ask some questions. Huang Yi didn't intend to beat around the bush. He didn't like to beat around the bush. At the same time, he felt that the Yanjiao people shouldn't like this way of meeting, so he simply went straight to the point. A few days ago, we noticed something unusual here, so we came to have a look. I wonder if you can tell us why. Sorry, we can't tell you, the shaman said dryly. The others didn't say anything. The silent atmosphere in the house became stagnant and stiff. One side wanted to inquire about something, while the other side was too lazy to say anything. Huang Ye's eyes swept over the Yanjiao people and finally looked at Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian sighed softly. Although Huang Yi wasn't very likable sometimes, during the trip to the desert, compared to the others, he treated the 3 Yanjiao people well. Everything is fine here. As for the rest, it's Yanjiao's business. You don't have to worry about it. This meant that they shouldn't ask any more questions. Even if they did, they wouldn't be able to get an answer. Qiu Gu's narrowed eyes were slightly curved, looking like a kind elder. I know, because of what happened in the desert, you are angry. This is indeed our fault, Qiu Gu said. If you know it's wrong, why didn't you come earlier? Where have you been for the past 2 years? Did you just focus on robbing the desert? Duo Kong crossed his legs and squinted at the 3 people over there. He didn't give them any face at all. Perhaps these people in the old haunt weren't good with words. In the past, they spent most of their time in an environment isolated from the rest of the world. Every day and night, they faced their own people. Even if they had a conflict, they had a bottom line and a sense of propriety. Back and forth, they would say the same things. They couldn't go too far, otherwise they would be scolded by the shaman. After coming to the old haunt, when they went out to trade, they had met many people, but it had become a habit. Every year, they didn't have much time to go out, especially in the past 2 years. They basically stayed in the forest. The people in the old haunt were still the same. But Duo Kong and the others were different. When they were on the other side of the sea, they often quarreled with their neighbors, the Taiha tribe. They had a small quarrel every 3 days. When they were angry, they would expose each other's secrets. It was the same for other tribes. They were more casual and said whatever they wanted. After coming here, Duo Kong and the others also learned about the past, so when they heard what the other party said, Duo Kong couldn't help but mock them. Listening to these people's different words, Duo Kong only felt unhappy. In the past, he often saw the Taiha tribe and found them annoying. Now that he couldn't see them anymore, he missed them. No matter what, they were better than these people, right? After Duo Kong finished speaking, he raised his head and looked out of the window. When Huang Yi and the other two heard Duo Kang's words, they frowned at the same time. The matter of the bronzeware was no longer a secret. Since the slave owners had escaped from the desert, it was natural for some news to spread. Especially in the trading places where the trading teams were more concentrated, there were all kinds of news flying around. True and false, there were countless. But no matter whether it was true or false, the fact that the 7 major tribes robbed the slave owners was still known by everyone. Of course, for the tribes, this wasn't a shameful thing to say. On the contrary, being able to rob them proved that they had the strength and the means of the 7 major tribes. In addition, they robbed the slave owners, who were usually pretentious and always felt superior to others, so the people of the 7 major tribes were still very respectful of them. Huang Yi and the others thought the same as the others, but now listening to Duo Kang's words, they felt that it was very harsh. This tone was too sarcastic. Was he jealous of them? Chapter 506. As a tribe that robbed many slave owners in the desert and got a lot of gold wares, Huang Yi and the other two were prepared to be blackmailed before they entered the forest. They also brought a lot of gold wares with them this time. They thought that the Yanjiao people seldom went out of the forest and had limited knowledge, so they brought some inferior wares, most of which were bottles and pots, and few weapons. However, until now, Huang Yi and the other two didn't feel any sense of superiority. They even ignored the big wooden box they deliberately put on the open space next to them. They even left a gap in the wooden box, revealing a corner of the golden wares inside, which was very conspicuous under the light coming in from the window. However, these Yanjiao people didn't look at the box. Even if they saw it, they just glanced at it and then didn't look at it. Especially the man who spoke in a sarcastic tone just now, he even showed a contemptuous look when he looked at the box. Even when he glanced at them, the contempt didn't fade away. This made Huang Yi and the other two angry. When they were in other tribes, they had never been treated like this. Only these Yanjiao people could treat them like this. These Yanjiao people obviously wouldn't be persuaded by force or persuasion. If they didn't want to say anything, they wouldn't say anything no matter how they forced them. However, the secret of the fire seed was like a cat's paw, scratching their hearts from time to time. With the intention of giving it a try, Chiu Gu of the 8 Limbs tribe raised his hand and motioned the people standing behind him to open the box and take out the things inside. Maybe the box was placed at a bad angle, so these Yanjiao people didn't see it clearly. Or maybe they didn't see it completely, so they didn't know what was inside. Then let's broaden their horizons. When the box was opened, the golden light reflected on the wall inside the room. Exquisite wares were placed on the table, such as wine bottles, flagons, small tripods, and so on. Some of them had inscriptions and animal patterns on them, which looked really good. When Chiu Gu and the other two snatched these wares, they looked at them for a long time. When they brought them to the Yanjiao tribe, they were quite reluctant to part with them. However, in order to find out more information from the Yanjiao tribe, they had to pay a little. When the other tribes took out these gold wares, those people stared straight at them and couldn't wait to stretch their necks to take a closer look. They also symbolically gave out some gold wares as small gifts to the small and medium-sized tribes that they had dealings with in order to win the hearts of the people. Qiu Gu was very pleased with himself when he asked his men to display these items. You Yanjiao people have been holed up in this damned place all day long, so you've never seen anything like this before. However, Qiu Gu soon discovered that things were not as he had imagined. The 8 Yanjiao men across the table looked at Qiu Gu as if they were looking at an idiot. The smile on his face became more and more stiff. Duo Kong exhaled air from his nostrils and let out a strange laugh. The disdain in his eyes deepened. How could he show off such a small thing? It wasn't that Duo Kong looked down on them. There were very few gold wares here, and the tribesmen had even fewer. He knew this, so he didn't look down on them. He was angry that these people wanted to use these to open the Yanjiao people's mouths. These people must have gotten a lot of good things in the desert in the past 2 years. Knives, swords, spears, axes, armors, and the like. They must have gotten some, but what were these things on display? Things to eat, drink, and play with. Even when they were in the city, they wouldn't trade things for them. To them, these things were impractical. The slave masters could be extravagant, but they weren't to that extent. These things were just decorations. They couldn't be used to hunt or kill people, so what was the use of them? These people kept all the good things for themselves, and the things they displayed were all empty. Who were they trying to fool? Did they think that the Yanjiao people were as gullible as everyone else? The Feather Tribe's Guji, who had been sitting silently on the side, had been observing the Yanjiao people's expressions. When he saw the 8 Yanjiao people's expressions, his pupils suddenly shrank. These Yanjiao people didn't seem to be strangers to gold wares. Realizing that something was wrong, the 3 of them pondered over the reason and thought of a possibility at the same time. Could it be that those rumored people who came out of the desert were actually arranged there by the Yanjiao tribe? They just waited for the desert to become chaotic and then robbed the slave masters of their belongings? They thought they were a bunch of barbarians, but they didn't expect them to be so scheming. Sure enough, they were wrong about this group of people. Huang Yi and the other 2 people's thoughts raced at the same time. Their thoughts were like a runaway camel, running all over the desert in the face of a storm. How many things did the Yanjiao people get from the desert? No, that wasn't the point. What had happened to the fire seed of the Yanjiao people? They always felt that the Yanjiao tribe seemed to have more and more secrets. At this time, the people from the 3 tribes were more or less regretful. If they had taken the time to come here, maybe they could have eased the tension between the 2 sides. Unfortunately, at that time, all of their attention was on the desert. They had miscalculated. For a moment, the stone house fell into an awkward silence again. But Huang Yi and the other 2 people didn't achieve their goal, so they wouldn't give up so easily. Since these gold wares couldn't move people, they would change it. We were blind. We didn't know Yanjiao was also taking action. We made a fool of ourselves. Qiu Gu gave a self-deprecating laugh, but he did not ask the others to put away these dazzling objects. Since he had already taken them out, he had no intention of putting them away. Although these gold objects were precious, as a large tribe, they had to have the generosity of a large tribe. They could pick up and let go, and could not haggle over every ounce like those small tribes. They would treat these as an apology. As far as we know, many slave masters escaped from the desert, and most of these slave masters are now in one place. Qiu Gu pointed in the direction of the Wancher tribe. I know you've always wanted to get rid of that guy outside, but due to some reasons, you didn't do it. The so-called due to some reasons, Qiu Gu himself didn't know. He thought it should be that the Yanjiao people didn't have enough confidence, so they didn't start the war. But if he said it directly, the Yanjiao people would feel embarrassed, so he expressed it in a roundabout way. In fact, We didn't like the Wancher people, but because of the slave masters behind them, we didn't do anything. Now the situation in the desert is settled, and the people behind the Wancher tribe have all escaped. They are no longer a threat. Chiu Gu's eyes widened slightly, trying to look more sincere. Why don't we cooperate? What do you think? That's right. Gu Ji also said, the Feather tribe is one of us. They also wanted to get rid of the Wancher tribe and the slave masters who escaped, but they didn't have the time. Now they could use the power of Yanjiao to get rid of that trouble, and also ease the relationship with Yanjiao. It was indeed a good idea. The Mang tribe is one of us, Huang Yi said. They talked excitedly, but the Yanjiao people didn't say anything. After the other side finished speaking and stopped, Ao said, we appreciate the three of your good intentions. We'd better solve the problem of the Wancher tribe by ourselves. They didn't expect the Yanjiao people to refuse. Chiu Gu and the other two people didn't understand. Cooperation was a win-win situation. Why couldn't these people think it through? The Wancher tribe wasn't easy to deal with. Although the slave masters escaped, they still had power, especially the slaves in their hands. None of them were afraid of death. They had experienced it many times in the desert, so the Yanjiao people should understand. Why let their emotions affect their decisions? Stupid, short-sighted, ignorant. As soon as Ao finished, Zheng Luo said, if you want to deal with the Wancher tribe, why don't we let you go first? I heard that the big tribes in the central region have good relations. It shouldn't be difficult to attack the Wancher tribe together. Zheng Luo's meaning was simple, if you can do it, then do it. If you can't, then don't talk nonsense. We'll do it. What's the point of giving so many reasons? Who didn't have an open mind? On the other side of the sea, Zheng Luo and the others often dealt with caravans, so they were smart. When Chiu Gu said this, he knew what he meant, so he wasn't in a good mood. You want to use us as weapons, and you want us to be grateful? No way. You think we can't do it without you? Although the Yanjiao people here knew that cooperation would save them a lot of trouble, what would happen after this was over? These people would probably start blackmailing them. Besides, they weren't even fighting yet. Would the Yanjiao tribe dare to cooperate with these people? They didn't even have sincerity, how could they cooperate? They were far worse than the Taiha tribe. After Duokang, Zheng Luo's mind wandered as he thought of their good neighbor, the Taiha tribe. Chiu Gu and the others fell silent again. They had thought about it before, but they didn't plan to act immediately. Although they had gained a lot in the desert 2 years ago, the tribe had also suffered losses and needed time to recover. If it wasn't for the Yanjiao fire seed, they wouldn't have proposed cooperation to attack the Wancher tribe. Other than that, they weren't that determined to destroy the Wancher tribe. After all, the Wancher tribe's existence could keep Yanjiao in check. With them, Yanjiao wouldn't be able to dominate this region. If Yanjiao rose up, it would be a threat to them. Xiao Xian could guess what they were thinking, but he knew Yanjiao's character. This time, Yanjiao really did plan to go it alone. They would use the Wancher tribe as their first test after the merger. In a place like this, if you wanted to gain status, you had to fight for it. This was the most primitive rule. Xiao Xian was willing to bet that if Yanjiao agreed to cooperate today, even if the Wancher tribe was destroyed, people would say that Yanjiao had borrowed the glory of the other tribes. If that happened, the shaman would vomit blood. To the Yanjiao people, lost glory had to be won back by themselves. Borrowing the strength of others wasn't considered a success. This was what the Yanjiao people insisted on. If they wanted Yanjiao to return to its peak, the Wancher tribe was undoubtedly a good stepping stone. Only one person could stand on this stepping stone. It could only be Yanjiao. Our tribe has its own arrangements for the Wancher tribe. You don't have to worry about it, Xiao Xian said. Chiu Gu and the other two still didn't give up. They tried their best to persuade Yanjiao, but Yanjiao's attitude was still stiff. When they were asked to leave the forest, Chiu Gu and the other two were still puzzled. Why were the Yanjiao people so stubborn? Do you think Yanjiao people really want to go to war with the Wancher tribe? Qiu Gu asked the other two. It's hard to say. Although the Yanjiao people's attitude seems obvious, who knows what their real intention is? Gu Ji had already labeled the Yanjiao people as super scheming. Let's wait and see. If they really have such an idea, the war won't be far away, Huang Yi said in a low voice. Yanjiao people were as stubborn as ever. It was really a headache. Chapter 507. To the three tribes, the Yanjiao tribe's answer could be summed up in one sentence: it's none of your business. The Yanjiao tribe's fire seed was abnormal. That's Yanjiao's business, what does it have to do with you? Will they attack the Wancher tribe? That's Yanjiao's business, what does it have to do with you? It had to be said that the three tribes felt a headache in the face of Yanjiao's attitude. They felt powerless and didn't know where to start. The Yanjiao people didn't even look at gold weapons. Fire seed. They all kept their mouths shut. Conflict with the Wancher tribe. The Yanjiao tribe had no intention of asking for help. Huang Yi and the other two could only inform their respective tribes of this troublesome news. Then they carefully considered whether they could find a better way to pry open the Yanjiao people's mouths. While these people were thinking about how to pry open the stubborn Yanjiao people's mouths, the Yanjiao tribe was also having a discussion. Now everyone has adapted well, said Ao. After the fusion of the fire seed, it was indeed more powerful. Everyone was much more excited. The previous restlessness had obviously faded a lot. And the warriors looked forward to showing off their skills. When Zheng Luo and the others returned to the old haunt, they saw the Wancher people. They knew that if they had come half a day later, the result might have been different. The tribe's fire seed might not have been destroyed, but many people would have been sacrificed. They couldn't ignore this matter just because they didn't fight. Moreover, the Wancher people had destroyed the old haunt in Yanjiao. Many warriors still remembered how excited they were when they first arrived. But when they saw the mess on the ground, the remains of the stone pillars that had obviously been destroyed not long ago, and the fire pit had been dug into a messy pit. What kind of place was the fire pit? It was the most sacred place for the entire tribe. For the tribesmen, destroying the fire pit was a blood feud. It was a provocation and a declaration of war. If the chief hadn't stopped them, they would have already rushed out to fight. After so long, they still remembered this grudge. But back then, Yanjiao hadn't stabilized and they didn't know much about this new world. So the chief stopped them from acting rashly. But now the time was ripe. Yanjiao was complete. It was time to settle the score. They had adapted to the fusion of the fire seed and were preparing their weapons. Metal, bone, horn and so on. It was time to fight. But they still had to prepare before the battle. The elderly, children, and women who hadn't awakened totemic power had to retreat into the forest first. They had to stay in a safe place to prevent someone's lives of their own. He also had to send someone to keep an eye on the wanderer area to prevent spies from appearing among the wanderers. He also had to keep an eye out to prevent rumors from spreading. As for what to do with the slave masters of the Yanjiao, the giant clawed bear is with the bone beast. What will you do? Xiao Xian asked Duo Kong. Of course we'll do it together. Duo Kong didn't think much of it and made a chopping gesture. But when he turned around, he saw the others staring at him. They weren't happy with his idea. What if you don't bring many people and it's hard to deal with these two beasts? Xiao Xian asked again. The Yanjiao was not only huge, but also had thick skin. It was fierce and aggressive. It was one of the most ferocious species of the Yanjiao. And the Yanjiao was even harder to deal with than the Yanjiao. Duo Kang's mind spun quickly. He slapped his leg. No. We should lure the Yanjiao away and focus on the Yanjiao. Then we'll find a chance to track the Yanjiao and set up a trap. Then we'll ambush it. When Xiao Xian first arrived at the tribe on the other side of the sea, he had used a trap to catch a bone beast. Many people's jaws dropped. Duo Kong remembered it vividly. When he saw Xiao Xian and the rest dragging a bone beast, he was equally shocked. He asked Duo Li about the details of the incident and still remembered it. Although Xiao Xian's metaphor was different from the current situation, it was enough to let Duo Kong know their plans. When Xiao Xian and Zheng Luo returned to the old haunt, they met the Wancher people and slave masters outside the fearsome beast forest. They knew then that the Wancher people and slave masters were not harmonious. There were conflicts everywhere. The Yanjiao tribe was not afraid of the Wancher and slave masters who escaped the desert. But if they could reduce their casualties, why not? Why fight head-on? They didn't want to work with other tribes, but that didn't mean they were reckless. And so, on a cloudy afternoon, when the sun was blocked by a large cloud, a blood-stained spear flew out of the fearsome beast forest. Like a bright flash of lightning, it flew high into the sky, leaving a crimson trail in the air as it flew towards the Wancher tribe. Bang! The spear stabbed into the ground not far from the Wancher tribe's outer wall. A third of the spear was embedded in the ground. All of a sudden, the guards outside the Wancher tribe were startled. A few days ago, there had been strange movements in the ferocious beast's mountain forest, which made the people of the Wancher tribe panic. However, the chief didn't allow them to talk about it in private. If they met someone, they would beat him directly. Therefore, even if they were curious about what had happened in the ferocious beast's mountain forest, they could only keep it in their hearts. But this kind of thing couldn't be suppressed for too long. Instead, it had the opposite effect. As a result, the guards were always absent-minded. In order to divert everyone's attention, the chief planned to send another team to rob a small tribe. Then they could bring back a few more women. Perhaps everyone's attention would be diverted from the fearsome beast forest. Therefore, when the long spear flew over, the guards were thinking about robbing women and valuables. They didn't notice the sudden long spear in the sky. When the long spear approached them, they suddenly felt that their scalps were covered with ice while the fine hairs on the back of their necks were quivering. It was a reaction brought by intuition. When they heard the sound of the spear hitting the ground was still a few steps away from them, they felt relieved. They looked carefully and found it was a spear. If it was just an ordinary spear, it would be fine. But this spear was different. The spear was covered with a layer of beast blood. When they approached it, they could smell the obvious smell of blood. The blood on the spear was not completely dry. When they touched it, they would get some blood on their hands. There was a circle of animal skin tied near the end of the spear. The guard carefully walked over and untied the animal skin roll. When he opened it, he still smelled the strong smell of blood. But it was not like the spear was smeared with beast blood. Instead, there were words written on the animal skin roll with blood. After reading what was written on it, the guard hurriedly handed it over. Not long after, the chief of the Wancher tribe, Feng Ji, strode out of the tribe. His face was so gloomy as if a storm was brewing. The blood-stained spear was still lying there. Feng Ji walked over and grabbed the spear to pull it out. It didn't take much effort to pull out the spear from the ground. However, he quickly discovered that the stone spearhead of the spear was gone. When he asked someone to dig out the spearhead, he discovered that the entire spearhead had been shattered and separated from the body of the spear. Just how much force was used to make the stone spearhead become like this? Feng Ji suddenly felt that the wooden spear in his hand had become much heavier. What did the Yanjiao mean by this? A demonstration? A declaration of war? Thinking about the words on the animal skin roll, Feng Ji thought that the Yanjiao people were declaring war. The slave masters soon learned about what happened in front of the Wancher tribe. After noticing the strange movements in the fearsome beast forest, the Wancher tribe had strengthened their guards. They were ready for any attacks and guarding against the Yanjiao people. The slave masters didn't plan to rely on the Wancher people for information. They trusted themselves more and sent people to keep an eye on the situation. So soon after the spear fell to the ground, they learned about it. Before Biemo could destroy the animal skin scroll, several slave owners brought their own slaves and came to ask Biemo about the animal skin scroll. He knew that the more he tried to hide it, the more suspicious the slave masters would be. Therefore, after the slave masters had mentioned it several times, Fu Wu changed his mind at the last minute and took out the animal skin scroll instead of destroying it. These words were written by the flaming horns. "The blood used is also human blood," said Fu Ji as he looked at the slave master holding the scroll. His brows were tightly furrowed. After killing enough, they could tell the difference between animal blood and human blood. The blood on the spear was animal blood, but the words on the animal skin roll were definitely human blood. "The Yanjiao declared war on us. We have to prepare for battle," Feng Ji said. The person holding the animal skin roll did not comment on Baian's words. He rolled up the animal skin roll and left with it without giving it back to Baian. Feng Ji's expression darkened as he watched the slave masters and slaves leave. The slave masters who left sneered inwardly. The Yanjiao people wrote on the animal skin roll that they hated the Wanchur people. It was obviously against the Wanchur people. What did it have to do with the slave masters? But if the Wanchur people were unlucky, where would the slave masters go? It was rare for them to find a decent place. It would be a pity to give it up. But the Wanchur people were becoming more and more disobedient. They had almost forgotten who helped them rise up. Perhaps they should foster a new tribe. He couldn't tell, so he took the animal skin roll to discuss with the others. At the edge of fearsome beast forest, Duo Kong stretched his arms and looked proudly at Ta and Gigu. "How was it? I threw the spear well, didn't I?" Tower ignored him. Gui he waved his hand and said, "I can do that too. However, the real competition will have to wait until the start of the war." All three of them were candidates for chief. This battle with the Wanchur people was their chance to prove themselves. Ta looked away from the Wanchur tribe and turned to Xiao Xian. "What if the slave masters don't leave? What should we do?" "Then we'll deal with them all," Xiao Xian said. Chapter 508. Xiao Xian and the others just wanted to test the slave masters hiding in the Wanchur tribe. If there were conflicts between the slave masters or disagreements with the Wanchur tribe, it would be a good thing for Yanjiao. As long as they didn't band together, it would be beneficial for Yanjiao. Now there were more than one slave master in the Wanchur tribe. According to the information they gathered, besides the slave masters in White Stone, who had the closest relationship with the Wanchur tribe, there were more or less slave masters in the other cities. With such a group of people mixed together, and thinking about the temperament of the slave owners, it would be difficult to get them to unite. "The Wanchur tribe's chief must be very troubled now," said Duo Kong. "No matter what they do, no matter how they react in the end, we have to fight this war," said Ta, staring fiercely in the direction of the Wanchur tribe. "That's right, just like Xian said, we can just plan together," said Gigu. Gigu was about to ask Xiao Xian some more questions when he saw Xiao Xian staring in one direction. He didn't say anything and just observed what was there. Duo Kong and Ta didn't say anything when they saw this. With their abilities, they could naturally sense that there was something approaching them from the bushes in the forest. However, judging from the movements in the bushes and what they felt, the approaching thing wasn't a threat, so they didn't pay much attention to it. In the forest on the left, there was a rustling sound in the bushes. The sound was getting closer and closer, and they could clearly see the grass shaking. Through the dense bushes, although they could only see a little bit of beast fur through the narrow gaps between the bushes, they knew what it was. It was a wild rat often seen in the forest. It was small, fast and agile, but because it was too small, it wasn't a fearsome beast, and it didn't have much meat. For creatures like this that lived at the bottom of the food chain, unless life was really difficult, they would usually set traps around the fields to prevent them from damaging the crops. Usually, tribesmen wouldn't bother with rats like this, especially after they came to the old haunt. Their lives were much better, and now they just ignored rats when they saw them. The forest was so big, and there were so many rats like this. Duo Kong and the others didn't care about this seemingly ordinary rat. Just as they were about to look away, they saw Xiao Xian quickly pull out a spear dart from the animal belt tied around his waist. Without any hesitation, he threw his arm. The stone spear dart was like a cold gray light, shooting towards that direction with murderous intent. Puff! The sound of a sharp weapon piercing through flesh and nailing to the ground could be heard from the bushes. Following that, a trace of blood qi diffused out. Xiao Xian walked over and picked up a brown rat that was smaller than a fist from the bushes. This rat was still alive. Xiao Xian held the spear dart's handle and looked at the rat that was still struggling. A fierce red light flashed in the rat's wide eyes, then dimmed as if covered by a layer of haze. The rat's struggling body stopped moving. "What, are you interested in this little thing?" Duo Kong smiled. "It's not delicious." However, when he saw Xiao Xian frown as he stared at the dead rat, Duo Kang's smile disappeared. "What's wrong?" Ta and Gigu also knew that Xiao Xian wouldn't be so bored as to hunt a rat that could be found everywhere in the forest, so they quickly walked up and looked at the rat carefully. They didn't find anything strange. "I feel like its aura is familiar," said Xiao Xian. He had never seen this wild rat before, but for a moment, he suddenly had a feeling that he was being watched. That was not something an ordinary wild rat could have. "You've seen it before?" asked Duo Kong. He wasn't as face-blind as Guang Yi, but when it came to rats that were often seen, he felt like they all looked the same. How did Xiao Xian recognize it? Could it be that he could smell like a wild animal? Xiao Xian shook his head. "I haven't seen it before, but the feeling it gives me is very similar to the sand ants I saw in the desert in the Beast City." When Xiao Xian mentioned Beast City, the three team leaders immediately became serious. "Slave master?" asked Gigu. They were wary of the slave masters, especially after hearing about the completely different situation on the other side of the sea. The slave masters were far more powerful than they thought. Although the tribesmen didn't have any good feelings towards the slave masters because of those people in the desert, they had to admit that the slave masters' strength naturally had their own reasons. Some things were really admirable. Therefore, there was no room for carelessness when it came to the slave masters, even more so than the Wancher tribe. It could be the slave masters who escaped from the desert, or it could be the Wancher people. Xiao Xian told them about what he encountered in Beast City. At that time, when he, Lei and Tua followed the people of Luoya City to Beast City, they once saw a few sand ants in a room. At that time, several sand ants were dismembered by Sapphire and wrapped in dung balls. Xiao Xian didn't study it carefully, he just thought it was strange why there were sand ants there. Later, he couldn't find the reason and just let it go. However, now, here, Xiao Xian found a feeling similar to the sand ants. There was something wrong with this wild rat. "Recently, everyone should be on guard," Xiao Xian said after thinking about it. "Let the tribes be busy." Xiao Xian didn't know how many such wild rats there were, nor did he know if there were other beasts besides these wild rats. At such a critical time, it was always good to be on guard. If people couldn't feel the strangeness of those beasts, then let the beasts do it. The three team leaders nodded again and again. They didn't think of this because they hadn't encountered it before, so they didn't know there was such a method. If Xiao Xian hadn't reminded them, maybe the Wancher tribe would have known about it. When the wild rat was nailed to death by Xiao Xian, the Wancher tribe, in a large stone house near the center of the tribe. A man sitting cross-legged on a piece of animal skin spat out a mouthful of blood. The blood dripped from his mouth onto the bone ornament around his neck that was carved into various skulls. At this moment, his face was pale and his muscles twitched. His eyes were fierce and filled with undisguised anger. His twisted face looked even more ferocious. "How is it?" The chief of the Wancher tribe, Feng Wu, asked hurriedly. "One was nailed to death." The young Wancher shaman breathed heavily. This feeling of being out of control was very unpleasant. He recalled what happened in the desert. He still remembered that time. In order to curry favor with the young lord of Whitestone City, he took out the sand ants that he had painstakingly raised and guided them to do something. But he did not expect that not a single one of those sand ants could come back. In the end, not only did they fail to satisfy the young master of the Baishur tribe, but they also suffered great losses. He hadn't completely swallowed his anger, and now it happened again. Before he lost all connection with the sand ants, he had seen a ball of fire, but it was blurry. There seemed to be a horn in the fire, but he didn't know what it was. Later, he had various guesses, but he couldn't be sure. Now, he finally knew what that ball of fire represented. It was a yanjiao. This time, before he lost connection with the wild rat, he saw the ball of fire again. It was very clear and very large, much larger and clearer than the one the sand ants saw last time. He saw something that looked like two horns in the fire. That was the yanjiao totem. And the person who nailed the wild rat he sent out was a yanjiao. It was always a yanjiao. The yanjiao were simply evil. The chief of the Wancher tribe, Feng Wu, heard the result and cursed angrily. Of course, he wasn't cursing the Wancher shaman, he was cursing the yanjiao. But while he was cursing the yanjiao, he was also cursing the Wancher shaman as trash in his mind. 2 years ago, when the young shaman came back from the desert, he was extremely arrogant. He always thought that he was so arrogant that he didn't even take the leader seriously. Later, when the incident happened in the desert, he was under Feng Wu's control, so he became more obedient. While the Wancher shaman was panting and Feng Wu was cursing, the others in the room lowered their heads and didn't say a word. They were usually fierce to their subordinates, but now they were like children who had made a mistake. They stood there, afraid of being noticed by Feng Wu. When Feng Wu finished cursing, the others raised their heads slightly to discuss the upcoming war with the Yanjiao tribes. Everyone present was at least a small leader in the Wancher tribe. In the past, they had all participated in attacking other tribes. If they were attacking a small tribe, they would rush forward one by one. First come, first served, and those who were slow would not get anything. But this time, they weren't sure about the war with the Yanjiao. They had never thought that they would be attacked in their lifetime. Yanjiao had declared war on them. What a headache. The current situation in the Wancher tribe proved that if you robbed, you had to pay back. What will the slave masters do? Feng Wu looked at the Wancher shaman. After a while, the Wancher shaman had calmed down. He thought for a moment and said, "I don't think so." Feng Wu violently smashed a wooden table next to him into pieces. Those. Feng Wu wanted to curse, but he was still afraid of the slave masters. Who knew if there were any slave masters listening in? The more he thought about it, the angrier he became. He held back his anger and took deep breaths. Are we really going to fight? I heard, the Yanjiao people are quite strong. A small leader stammered. He was promoted because of his meritorious service when he went out to rob a small tribe at the end of last year. Compared to the other senior leaders, he was still too inexperienced. He didn't know that there were some words that could never be said at this time. Sure enough, as soon as the small leader finished speaking, he suddenly felt his vision blur. A strong murderous aura hit him so hard his legs went weak. He didn't even have a chance to beg for mercy. Feng Wu appeared in front of the small leader like a shadow. He raised his arm, hiding a terrible power under the bulging muscles. When he clenched his fist and rushed out, it was like a shot of a cannonball. The sound of it breaking through the air was like a ferocious poisonous snake, releasing its deadly murderous intent. The fist that rushed out smashed heavily into the chest of the sub-leader who had just spoken. The powerful impact and the power of this punch directly caused the sub-leader's back to explode. Blood and pieces of flesh spurted out behind him. When he pulled back his arm, Feng Wu was still holding a lump of flesh in his hand. It was the heart. The small leader didn't see the hole in his body. He didn't even have time to hide the fear on his face. He fell down with a thump. The other leaders in the room seemed to have expected this scene. They didn't look at it. They just shivered and lowered their heads in silence. The room was filled with the thick smell of blood, making the atmosphere more stagnant. Feng Wu shook off the blood and pieces of flesh in his hand. He didn't even look at the man on the ground. He said in a low voice, "Do you think I'm afraid of the Yanjiao? They're nothing. If we can dig their fire pit once, we can do it again." These words were for the others, and also for himself. The Wanshi shaman sat on the thick animal skin. He didn't speak, but when he lowered his head, his eyes flashed with disapproval. He didn't take the Yanjiao seriously before, but now he felt more and more uneasy. Especially the strange situation in the ferocious beast mountain forest a few days ago, he had been worried until now. However, he didn't feel any threat of life or death. The fire seed in the fire pit had grown bigger and looked more vigorous these days. As long as the fire seed was there, it could save his life. On the other side of the Wanshi tribe, the stone houses built were different from the original style of the Wanshi tribe. There were no drawings of the Wanshi tribe. This was the place of the slave owners. After they came to the Wanshi tribe, they drew out such a place. As for whether the chief of the Wanshi tribe agreed or not. How could the chief of the Wanshi tribe not agree? Without the support of the slave owners, how could the Wanshi tribe reach where it was today? At this time, in one of the stone houses, several slave owners gathered together to discuss. In front of them, there was a roll of animal skin. It was the same one that the Yanjiao tribe had tied to the spear and thrown out. "What do you think? Have you made up your mind?" an older slave owner asked. "Do you still need to think?" "It's not a good time to fight recklessly," a young slave owner said, lying on a chair. Although he didn't look old, there was a bit of momentum in his words, which showed that he used to be in a good position in the desert. On his clothes, there was the symbol of the Skywheel City in the desert. Next to him, a fat slave owner of the same age hugged a female slave and quickly said, yes, it's not a good time to fight. If the Wanshi tribe wants to fight, let them fight. We don't have to fight. Besides, the Yanjiao people hate the Wanshi tribe. This roll of animal skin shows that the Yanjiao people don't want to fight with us." The expressions of the other people in the house changed. They quickly exchanged glances to test each other's opinions, but didn't want to show their thoughts at this time. The former young master of the White Stone City glanced at the people in the house. He saw that they were thoughtful for a while, then frowned and looked dignified. After a while, they seemed to understand each other. He knew that the longer they discussed, the worse the situation would be. He was one of the few people here who supported the Wanshi tribe. Unfortunately, he couldn't persuade the others. Just look at the young master of the Skywheel City who spoke first. There was a big disagreement here. Some people felt that if the Wanshi tribe suffered, they, the slave owners, would not get any benefits. Supporting the Wanshi tribe was supporting themselves. But some people also felt that the Wanshi tribe was out of control. It was better to let the Yanjiao destroy the Wanshi tribe. This way, it would be easier to control them. Some people even hoped that the Yanjiao people would quickly destroy the Wanshi tribe's fire seed, so that they could take more Wanshi warriors as slaves. Perhaps, they could take advantage of the chaos to get more Yanjiao people as slaves. In the eyes of these slave owners, the tribesmen were all slaves. Countless slaves were the hope of their rise. Fight! Fight! It would be best if both sides suffered losses. Then they would take the opportunity to destroy the fire seed of both sides and recruit a large number of people. They were looking forward to it. Several slave owners were secretly calculating the abacus. Chapter 509. The Yanjiao people had no idea that the slave masters were plotting against them. Even if they did, they would laugh at them. What a bunch of idiots! If the fire seed was still concentrated in the fire pit, the slave masters might have had some hope. After all, it was the source of power for a tribe. However, the Yanjiao fire seed had long been integrated into every Yanjiao person. Even though the Wanchur people and the slave masters could sense the change in the Yanjiao fire seed, they never thought that it was the fusion of the fire seed. Because such a thing had never happened here before. Not every slave master knew some secrets. That was why the slave masters who escaped the desert and hid in the Wanchur tribe didn't know much about the fire seed. This led them to have a misconception. They kept this misconception, thinking that as long as the fire seed was gone, it would be time for the slave masters to rise again. Many of them even thought about going back to the desert and taking revenge on the people of Rock Hill City. The slave masters were scheming. The Wanchur people were preparing for war. In the fearsome beast forest, the Yanjiao people had already begun a large-scale adjustment. Those who couldn't participate in the battle retreated to their original hiding spot. The terrain there was easy to defend and difficult to attack. If there were any changes, they could deal with it for a while. The wanderers had other places to settle down. When Xiao Xian returned to the tribe from the edge of the forest, he saw a group of warriors chatting together. They had just finished their training and were standing there in high spirits. This time, we're going to drive the Wanchur tribe out of here. We won't leave any land outside the forest for them. We'll take it all and farm it. That's right. They destroyed our fire pond before. Let's dig up their fire ponds as well. Yes. Dig it up. These were the people who saw the mess when they returned to the old haunt. They were all excited when they talked about it. They wanted to kill all the Wanchur people. Every tribe had a bottom line. Anyone who crossed that line would be provoked and declared war. This battle had been delayed for a long time. Now it was finally here. Ferocious beasts were driven away by fighting, not persuasion. To the Flaming Horn tribesmen, the Wanchur tribesmen were ferocious beasts lurking around their nest, ready to bite them at any moment. They had to use their fists and blood-stained blades to kill the ferocious beasts. Even if they couldn't kill them, they had to chase them away. How could he allow others to snore beside his bed? It was simply intolerable. Not everyone could coexist peacefully with Yanjiao like the Taiha tribe. Lei and Tuo were also among them, and their well-defined faces showed fortitude and expectation. Tuo was holding a stone knife in his hand, which was the knife he was used to. Although the tribe had also made a copper knife, they could not make it into the knife he was used to, and it was not easy to use. There was a big difference between a stone knife and a copper knife. The feeling was not right, and he could not find the right feeling. He was about to fight with Wanchur. He did not want to give his opponent a chance because of a saber that was not easy to use. Xiao Xian found that there were some wood chips on Tuo's knife. Apparently, he had gone to training not long ago to simulate people with wood and practice chopping. How are the preparations going? Xiao Xian asked Tuo when he passed by with Duo Kong and the other two. Not bad. Tuo laughed. I'm looking forward to revenge. The contradiction between Tuo and Lei and the Wanchur tribe and the slave owners was deeper. When they went to the desert with Xiao Xian, they were caught in the beast city and thrown into the Colosseum. If it weren't for Xiao Xian, they would have become two of the victims of the Colosseum. It would have been impossible for them to return to the old land alive. The people who had betrayed Lei and Tuo were the new Wanchur shaman and the people of Baishur city. They still remembered this hatred, and now the new hatred and old hatred were avenged together. Lei's eyes flashed with anger and excitement. Finally, there was a chance for revenge. This day had finally come. War was an important part of human social activities. Whether it was between tribes or slave owners, there were always some big and small frictions. These would cause friction and contradictions, and war was the most direct way to solve these frictions. The ultimate goal was survival. Duo Kong and the others were no strangers to this. Snatching territory, resources, salt mines, and so on were all obtained through war. For the other half of the people, this was their first large-scale war in 1,000 years. Xiao Xian was thinking when he suddenly heard someone call him. Xian, the shaman wants you to go over. Mai ran over from not far away and said to Xiao Xian. At this time, the shaman wanted Xiao Xian to go over. There must be something important to discuss. Without delay, Xiao Xian and the other two parted ways and ran towards the shaman. The two shamans' houses were not far from each other. After arriving, Xiao Xian saw Ao and Zheng Luo standing at the door of the old shaman's house. Seeing Xiao Xian, Ao nodded towards the house, motioning for Xiao Xian to hurry in. Walking quickly, Xiao Xian found that the old shaman was there too. The two shamans each sat on a thick animal skin, looking like they were waiting for Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian walked over and sat on a large animal skin on the ground in front of them. Do the two shamans have something to tell me? The old shaman looked up at Xiao Xian. Do you know what to do in the battle with Wancher? Xiao Xian nodded. Yes. When the time comes, I will take the lead with the 3 team leaders. The battle plan had been laid out, but Wancher's people were already prepared. The effect of a sneak attack was not necessarily good. They still had to attack by force. Once the battle started, the warriors with high status in the tribe would naturally be at the front. This time, the two shamans would not lead the charge. They would be in charge of commanding from the back. Duo Kong and the other 2 team leaders would be at the front. The shamans would also use this opportunity to evaluate their performance. As the grand elder of the tribe, Xiao Xian could not fall behind. If he went with Duo Kong and the other 2, who in the tribe would trust him in the future? Just because of the blessings of the ancestors and previous contributions? No matter how great the contributions were, their influence would still decline after a long time. Xiao Xian was already mentally prepared. This was not the first battle, but this was the largest one. It would be a lie to say that he was not stressed. Although he knew that it was very dangerous to be at the front, this was a place where strength was respected. He had to act when he had to. Plus, this was the first large-scale battle between the Yanjiao tribes. Those with high status in the tribe naturally had to be the vanguard, boost morale, and lead the troops. The higher the status, the greater the responsibility. Hearing Xiao Xian's words, the 2 shamans nodded. It was rare that they did not object. In the past, if they heard that Xiao Xian was going to a dangerous place, they would definitely be the first to object. But now, the tribe was complete. In order to return to glory, they would have to go through more in the future. If Xiao Xian wanted to stabilize his position in the tribe, he had to show new results. Only then would the people in the tribe be more convinced. In this battle with Wancher, your mission is different from Gigu and the others. The shaman said, their targets are the Wancher people, the leaders of Wancher. Your target is the fire seed of Wancher. Xiao Xian's eyes widened. Wancher's fire seed. That's right. If possible, destroy their fire seed. Don't give them a chance to transport it away. Tua and the others will help you. Of course, the Wancher people will definitely guard the fire pit. If you can't find a chance, just wait until the battle is over. But if there is a chance. I know, Xiao Xian nodded, then asked, if there is a chance, what should I do to destroy the fire seed? Well. The old shaman stroked his beard. According to our ancestors, you should use the power of inheritance. It will guide you. The 2 shamans had no experience in destroying a fire seed. They had only heard that the shaman's power of inheritance was needed to completely extinguish the enemy's fire seed. Many tribes would clean up the battlefield after the battle before sending the shamans to destroy the fire seed. But they had only heard about it. After all, they had never seen it with their own eyes. They could only tell him what they knew. Don't force yourself. Your life is the most important. At worst, When the battle is over and we've cleaned up most of the Wancher people, we'll go personally, said the shaman. Yes, I know. Don't worry. Xiao Xian said solemnly. The two shamans' hearts thumped at the same time. They felt more and more uneasy. At this time, they suddenly regretted telling Xiao Xian these things. Before Xiao Xian left, they repeatedly told him, don't force yourself. Do what you can. The people in the tribe had almost been transferred. When Xiao Xian returned from the shaman's place, Caesar was carrying a big bag. He was helping Old Ku and the people around to transport things. The most obvious thing was Old Ku's big box with various stone tools. Old Ku had polished many weapons and distributed them to the people who were also transferred to avoid the battle. Although they were old and weak, they were not without a little bit of fighting power. If they encountered sneak attacks, they could still fight with weapons. Don't worry about us. Be careful. Old Ku patted Xiao Xian's shoulder hard. He knew that Xiao Xian was the vanguard like the three team leaders. This was different from hunting. The people who rushed in front had to bear much more pressure and danger. Old Ku couldn't help but worry. If it was someone else, Old Ku would definitely think that as a person with such a high status in the tribe, he was not old or a shaman. He was strong and young. How could he feel embarrassed to hide in the back? But when it was Xiao Xian, Old Ku had a different idea. It was a natural double standard. It was human nature. The shamaness also asked someone to make some close-fitting clothes for us with the rest of the white worm skins. Xiao Xian showed the white worm skins he was wearing inside to Old Ku. These are good for protection. Old Ku just sighed and didn't say anything. There was no such thing as absolute protection in the world. Even if the worm's skins were hard to cut, it was just hard to cut. It wasn't impossible to cut. Otherwise, how could the worm's skin clothes be made? Besides, how could they be fine after being hit by an axe? 2 days later. Most of the non-combatants in the tribe had been transferred. The two shamans were also transferred. Dawn came, but the sky was still dark. Xiao Xian sat by the fire pit and looked at the people who gathered. Let's go. Xiao Xian got up and patted Caesar beside him. He led him to the team. Chapter 5:10. The sky was still dark. At this time, Wancher's guards had not changed shifts. Those who had been on duty all night were tired. Those who changed shifts might not have woken up yet. The birds that the slave masters raised to patrol in the sky were not active either. When Xiao Xian and the others arrived at the edge of the forest, the sky above was already dimly lit. The birds that usually woke up early were ready to chirp. Ao looked at Zheng Luo. Seeing Zheng Luo nod, he raised his hand and the people in the forest rushed out. They were very fast but their movements were very light. For a moment, only the rustling of clothes and leaves could be heard. The team quickly approached the Wancher tribe. Wancher's guards weren't idiots either. Ever since the Flaming Horn's fire seed mutated in the forest, they had been on alert. Although they were exhausted after a night of guarding, it was impossible that they didn't notice the Flaming Horn's approach. Enemy attack. A loud shout disturbed the quiet atmosphere in the Wancher tribe. A sharp bone whistle pierced the silence of dawn. The surroundings were filled with killing intent. Yanjiao's troops were still some distance away from Wancher's outskirts. But when Wancher's troops moved, Yanjiao's troops moved too. Inside Wancher's camp, torches were lit one by one. Although it was already dawn, the sky was still dark. Those with poor eyesight could not see clearly. Plus, they were in a hurry. It was easy to make mistakes if they did not light the torches. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, the sound of something tearing through the air resounded in the sky. It was as if a sharp arrow was piercing through the air at high speed. Those with quick reflexes had already raised bone shields in front of them. The sound came from above. Yanjiao's troops were not very close so the chances of them being shot were low. But soon, they realized something was wrong. As the sound of the arrows piercing through the air got closer and closer, some people carefully tilted their heads and looked up at the sky. Under the hazy light in the sky, a dense number of arrows were shuttling back and forth, but those arrows seemed to be a little too big. Bang! 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 Crack! The sound of arrows falling like raindrops. The person holding the shield only felt that the moment the shield was hit, the strong impact made his hand go numb. When he looked at the arrow on the ground next to him, his eyes immediately widened. What kind of arrow was that? It was clearly a spear. It was similar to the long spear that was stuck at the door that day. It had a wooden handle and a stone spearhead. The handle was thick and the spearhead was very sharp. Most of the stone spearheads that hit the shield were shattered by the strong impact, leaving only the wooden shaft. This startled the people of Wanshur. If it were just a few dozen or 100 of these spears, it would be fine. But in the previous round, there were thousands of them. The people of Wanshur had never seen any tribe use spears as arrows. This arrow was too big. It was probably only the Yanjiao people who took it for granted. After all, the Yanjiao people were strong. After that, the second wave of spears descended. This time, the people of Wanshur all picked up their shields. Some hid behind the stone walls or other objects to avoid this round of spears. When the spears were thrown, the people in front of the Yanjiao team did not stop. After the second wave of spears, the people in front of them followed closely behind. By now, the outer walls of the Wanshur tribe could be seen clearly. The moment the second wave of spears was thrown, Xiao Xian knew it was time for him to move. Go! Xiao Xian rushed out in large strides. He ran quickly, then jumped up and landed on Tuo's sword in front of him. Tuo's strong hand grasped the hilt of the sword. Then he waved the sword violently, using the force of the sword to send Xiao Xian flying. Duo Kang, Gigu, and Ta did the same thing as Xiao Xian. 4 figures, like 4 goshawks, rushed out from the group, wanting to soar into the clouds. As the 4 figures left, the team burst into cheers. Xiao Xian felt the cool dawn wind blowing in his face. He could smell the moist water vapor and the smell of mud in the cool wind. He could feel the strong murderous intent and desire to fight from the team below. It seemed to have spread to every corner. The team was like before when they were hunting. However, when they were hunting, they did not have such a strong aura. After all, when hunting, they often had to control their aura. But now, on the battlefield, their aura was completely released. Xiao Xian had never felt such a strong murderous intent from the people of the tribe. It was filled with blood and desire to fight that could not be ignored. It seemed that every pore of their body was erupting with this murderous intent. Every one of them was no longer a hunter in the forest. At this moment, the murderous intent that had been suppressed in their bodies erupted like a volcano. Thousands of murderous intents twisted together, like a wave of blood and savagery. It rose to an unprecedented height and slammed towards the Wanshur tribe. The totemic power in Xiao Xian's body seemed to have sensed the information released from the surroundings, instantly spreading throughout his body. The dark purple totemic patterns were not obvious under the dim sky, but they were even more dangerous. The Wanshur tribe was getting closer and closer. Xiao Xian flew over the outer wall of the Wanshur tribe. He pulled out his sword and blocked an arrow. Then he crashed into a man holding a shield. Crack! There was the sound of bones breaking. The man below did not even have the chance to scream. His body seemed to have lost its support. He fell to the ground, dead. The man holding the shield probably did not expect someone to fall from the sky and trample him to death. Xiao Xian's sudden appearance stunned the surrounding Wanshur people. There were at least a dozen people hiding from the rain of spears. They did not expect someone to jump from the sky. They probably did not expect to encounter such a crazy thing. Although they were surprised, they quickly adjusted and charged towards Xiao Xian with their weapons. Xiao Xian's back shot out like a bow. He swung his sword forward with the ferocity of the Yanjiao people. It was as if he was going to split the mountains and rivers. His bold and fierce aura suppressed the surrounding people, and the surrounding people who were raising their swords paused slightly. Clang! The person who took Xiao Xian's sword head-on lost his weapon and flew backwards. Xiao Xian did not look at him. He charged into the crowd. In an instant, Xiao Xian's entire body seemed to have transformed into a storm, sweeping across the battlefield. His sword flashed like an electric current, and his kicks were like a gust of wind. He used both his hands and feet, and the sound of air being cut rang out. Every strike seemed to have the force of 1,000 kilograms, and his power was like a hurricane. Every strike of his sword would cut down someone, and every kick would kick someone out of the battlefield. The sounds of metal against metal, metal against stone, fists and feet colliding with flesh rang out incessantly. Every sound was enough to shake one's soul. Xiao Xian could not count how many people he had. He did not have the time. He could not be distracted. All his energy was focused on this battle. Facing the torrential rain of swords, fists, and kicks, Xiao Xian was immersed in a subtle state. All of his senses were heightened, and he could even clearly feel the movements of the opponent's blade as it passed by him. He could feel the opponent's fierce eyes revealing what he was going to do next, and he could feel where the opponent's blade was going to cut him. The more he fought, the more Xiao Xian felt like he was facing the sea wall again. It was just like when he led the tribesmen on the stone path in the sea. At that time, he mostly relied on the strength of his ancestors. But now, his ancestors could not help him much. He was fighting with his own strength. Here, survival was like this. If you did not break through the obstacles in front of you, you would be suppressed. Behind the peace, there was always blood and slaughter. This was the most primitive rule. After being in the tribe for so many years, Xiao Xian had gradually integrated into this large group. He was one with Yanjiao. He wasn't alone. He had many companions behind him. He came to fight not only for himself, but also for the people who had been placed in the shelter. He also came for the glory of the Flaming Horn tribe that had passed away. I'm from the Flaming Horn tribe. I fight for the tribe. The excited factor in his blood seemed to have been stimulated, rapidly increasing. In his mind, the totem flames were raging, and the totem patterns on his body were like growing vines, becoming denser. If one looked carefully, one could see that under the deep purplish-black patterns, there were different shades of purplish-red flowing. The surrounding Wancher warriors stared at Xiao Xian in shock. He was surrounded, but he did not seem weak at all. He had the courage to fight alone. Every strike was fierce and powerful. But this person was like a fish. He dodged the endless swords and punches without fear. After Xiao Xian, other Yanjiao people arrived. They were sent over the wall in the same way as Xiao Xian and joined the battle. The wall was high and could block a lot of trouble. But the Wancher people probably did not expect the Yanjiao to throw people over. The smell of blood and slaughter quickly spread. Blood dyed the dawn red, and the wind that blew by also carried a murderous aura that made people tremble. The surrounding creatures all stayed away as if they were fleeing for their lives. They wanted to get out of this place. When the Yanjiao attacked, the Wancher leaders and leaders came out one after another. Knowing that the Yanjiao would attack, Fu Ji was not surprised. But seeing the situation now, he could not help but feel angry. When he took over as leader, only the Wancher people attacked others. They had never been attacked. Bai Xiu, the leader of the Wancher army, was standing on a high ground. He opened his eyes wide and looked around. He saw everything and his eyes flashed with a cold light. Then he roared, "Kill them!" Before his voice faded, Fu Ji had already jumped down from the high ground. After a few leaps, he rushed toward the battlefield. The wind was like thunder, like the beating of war drums. Behind Fu Ji, the others also joined the battle. Two tribes, two different forces. Neither side backed down. Like two ocean currents, they crashed into each other, creating countless whirlpools. Even the wind was messed up. Chapter 5:11. With the addition of Wancher's main force, the others retreated from the battlefield with pained expressions. By now, the Wancher people had a rough idea of who the leaders of Yanjiao's side were. Ordinary Wancher people couldn't fight these vanguards. They could only leave it to the stronger members of the tribe. Soldier against soldier, general against general. Up until now, in order to block Xiao Xian's attack, even if the people around Xiao Xian were not cut down or kicked away, they were all injured. In order to block Xiao Xian's attack, they could clearly feel the blood boiling in their chests, as if it was about to rush out of their throats. If they were distracted, they would suffer a fierce kick and be sent flying out of the battlefield. The Wancher people couldn't help cursing in their hearts. This kid was too strong. Even if they could only withstand the residual force, they felt their arms and legs go numb. If this continued, they wouldn't even have the strength to hold their weapons. In fact, it wasn't just these people. For Xiao Xian, it was more difficult. The continuous fierce battle made his chest heave up and down. His breathing wasn't easy. At this time, every second felt infinitely long. It felt like a long time, but in fact, it was only a few dozen seconds. Xiao Xian's physical strength was better. At the same time, he relied on his aura to suppress the others. That was why he could withstand the siege and break through. Fortunately, with the addition of Yanjiao's reinforcements, Xiao Xian had an easier time. Get out of the way. A man holding a shiny golden mace strode over with large strides. His eyes were filled with an ominous glint, and his entire body was emitting a strong killing intent, causing people to tremble in fear upon seeing him. This was one of the leaders of the Wancher tribe. He came with Bian, but Bian went to deal with the other side. He came with his men. Seeing that a group of people couldn't take down a kid, the leader was furious. His nostrils flared and his eyes flashed with cold light. As soon as they saw this person, the people surrounding Xiao Xian, as well as those who were rushing over, all turned around. They would not join the battle between the leaders. If they did, they would only be affected. They would not go over and seek death. When the leader rushed over, Xiao Xian clearly felt the immense pressure from his running. The mace in the other party's hand was probably made from materials provided by the slave masters. It looked more like a modified spear. The front of the mace had a sharp blade like a spearhead. Below the tip was a thickened mace with spikes like a wolf's fangs. Further back was the long mace. As the leader rushed over, he turned the mace at an angle. The spikes on the mace had a murderous aura, as if he was going to kill his opponent. Xiao Xian pushed back the two Wancher warriors in front of him. Without pausing, he bent his knees and shot towards the Wancher leader. The two sides ran towards each other, the distance between them shortened in the blink of an eye. Xiao Xian's entire arm that was wielding the sword cut through the air, causing the air to crackle, like the sound of wind and thunder. The Wancher leader planted his feet on the ground, swinging his mace to meet Xiao Xian's sword. Xiao Xian's sword was specially made for him by Gong Jiaheng. He knew that the Yanjiao people were strong, so this sword was bigger and wider than most swords in Royal City. He didn't know what Gong Jiaheng added to the sword, but it was obviously heavier than other swords of the same size. However, to Xiao Xian, this weight was nothing. Sometimes he even wished it was heavier. The sword drew a bright arc in the air, like heavy dark clouds during a rainstorm. At the moment of the collision, the Wancher leader felt a numbing pain in his arms, as if he had been hit by many sticks. The momentum he had just gained was almost dissipated by this blow. His hand holding the stick split open, and blood spurted out along with the vibration of his wrist. Although he knew that the Yanjiao people were strong, this was his first time fighting a Yanjiao person head-on. The pressure was stronger than he expected. Every bone and muscle in his body seemed to be trembling under this attack. They were screaming and emitting creaking sounds, losing their original coordination. His heart pounded violently, as if it was going to jump out of his chest. The blood vessels in his arms felt like they were going to explode. In that instant, the Wancher leader knew he had underestimated this flaming horn kid. At this moment, he couldn't think of anything else. He was terrified. If all the young flaming horns were like this person, would Wancher still have a chance to survive? Perhaps the leader had made the wrong decision. They should have left early. Someone had once told them that Yanjiao was a glorious tribe 1,000 years ago. Even the well-known powerful tribes in the central region were afraid of Yanjiao. However, no one believed that after 1,000 years of Yanjiao's disappearance, after 1,000 years of decline, they could return to their peak. Boom! It was as if a bomb had exploded. The ground where the two were fighting suddenly caved in. At the same time, the stones and dirt on the ground were blasted into the air, sending smoke and dust everywhere. Those close to the fight felt the ground shake. Those who were weaker even felt like they couldn't stand properly. At that moment, it was as if someone had taken off their brain. However, this wasn't because Xiao Xian and the Wancher leader had caused a violent earthquake. It was because of the impact of the collision, which affected the minds of those around them. They felt like the ground was shaking and they couldn't stand properly. However, this wasn't the end. Two silhouettes rushed out from the smoke and dust. Before the surrounding people could hide far away, the clanging sound of metal weapons colliding rang out again. Moreover, it was a series of metal clanging sounds. After a thunderous explosion, the next moment, it was as if there was a giant worm crawling under the ground. The soil was flipped up and rolled in the air before falling back down. The Wancher warrior, who happened to be standing in the line of impact, only felt a strong pressure, like a huge rock flying towards him, hit his chest hard, and he flew out like a sandbag. Seeing that the people around him couldn't help, the Wancher leader became anxious. He didn't fight Xiao Xian head-on anymore. As he retreated, he let out a series of strange cries. He couldn't continue to block this brat. He had already reached his limit. If this continued, he would definitely end up in a worse state than those who were sent flying just now. His head might even be chopped off by this flaming horn brat. Two figures jumped out of the battle circle not far away and came this way. Xiao Xian knew that they were looking for reinforcements. Just as he was about to kill this man who was at the end of his rope before the reinforcements arrived, he suddenly paused. The two people who were coming this way were blocked. The panting leader sensed that something was wrong. Just as he was about to retreat, someone grabbed his armor and lifted him up. He was dragged in a certain direction. Before he could react, he was thrown into the wall of a house not far away. He smashed into the wall with a loud bang. He had been a leader for so many years and had led people to attack other tribes many times. He used to be one of the most important helpers of the leader. When had he ever been lifted up and thrown out like this? Even the leader, Feng Wu, had never done this to them. This kind of way of talking about him as if he was talking about a small prey was simply insulting. However, he was already injured internally by Xiao Xian. Even though he was angry, he couldn't rush over and fight back. He couldn't join the battle now. If he wanted to fight, he could only fight against other ordinary beginner warriors. He couldn't fight against the leader of the other side. If he went, he would be courting death. After blocking the two people coming this way, Gigu freed one hand and threw the leader out. He quickly signaled to Xiao Xian that he would block this side and let Xiao Xian do his own thing. Since Gigu had come over and there were other Yanjiao warriors approaching, Xiao Xian didn't hesitate. He rushed out of the encirclement and headed in one direction. Xiao Xian's main target was the fire pit. Gigu, Duo Kong and Taal knew this, so they had to help Xiao Xian while keeping an eye on the Wancher chief and other leaders. Tua and the others had already come over. They were instructed by the shaman to go with Xiao Xian to the fire pit of Wancher. Most of the people who came with Tua were members of the advance group of the hunting team. Some of them used to follow Guihe, and some used to follow Ta. They used to compete and quarrel with each other. But now, they put aside their prejudice and cooperated with each other. Most of the fire pits of a tribe were in the center of the tribe. It was not easy to get there. There were a lot of people blocking the way, including many slaves. Because of the high temperature and exposure in the desert, the slaves' skin color was darker than others, so they were easy to recognize. Among these slaves, a large part of them were slaves from Whitestone City, which could be recognized from the slave marks on their bodies. Seeing the slaves of Whitestone City, Tua and Lei's eyes flashed fiercely. Among the several cities in the desert, they hated Whitestone City the most. Whitestone City not only had a close relationship with the Wancher tribe, but also had raised a Yanjiao trader. They roared and waved their sharp blades, killing the Whitestone City slaves in front of them. Their blades whistled through the air. The deeper they went, the more Xiao Xian felt the repulsive force of the Wancher fire seed. He believed that other Yanjiao people could feel it too. The influence of the fire seed could not be ignored. But when he felt the repulsive force, Xiao Xian found that there seemed to be another feeling that was different from the repulsive force. The Wancher chief, who had been injured internally by Xiao Xian and thrown out by Gigu, was now leaning against the wall, hiding in a corner. He panted and watched Xiao Xian and the others approaching the fire pit. He sneered but did not chase after them, nor did he let the others chase after them. It was not that he didn't care about the fire pit. As a chief of a tribe, he was also very worried about the fire pit. After all, the fire pit was related to the survival of the tribe. However, the shaman was guarding the fire pit. Those Yanjiao people could not destroy the fire pit, and might even die under the fire pit. Was the fire pit of the Wancher tribe so easy to get close to? Even those slave owners who had been harboring evil intentions did not dare to directly target their Wancher fire seed. That was the strongest place in the whole Wancher tribe. Otherwise, why would the Wancher tribe be called Wancher? Chapter 5:12. Xiao Xian and his men approached Wancher's fire pit. Strangely, the closer they got to Wancher's fire pit, the more slaves they saw. There were not many Wancher people. Wouldn't the people of Wancher be worried that the slave masters would destroy their fire seed if they let the slave masters help them around the fire pit? Were they too careless? Or were they not worried at all? Xiao Xian had to be more careful. Signaling the others to be alert, Xiao Xian did not stop waving his sword. Xiao Xian's sword was bigger and heavier than most people's, so he did not use it in a nimble way. Instead, he used it in a more direct way. Just like when he hunted, he used the least amount of energy and time to make the most effective response. At the same time, he used the Yanjiao's fierceness and agility. All of his skills were honed through hunting and actual combat. Clang! Xiao Xian slashed at a high-level slave in front of him. Because the other party's rank among the slaves was relatively high, they received better treatment. Compared to other ordinary slaves, these high-level slaves did not wear ordinary leather armor or protective armor made of animal bones. Instead, they wore metal armor, like a tortoise shell, protecting their torso from the front and back. There were also many protective equipment on their arms and legs. Xiao Xian's sword was aimed at the slave's neck. But the slave was prepared. Unable to dodge, he could only move aside and let the armor block the attack. However, even if he was wearing a turtle shell-like metal armor, it was not guaranteed that he would be able to defend against the attack. Xiao Xian's sword was indeed blocked by the armor. However, when the sword and the armor collided, other than the crisp sound of metal clashing, there was also a loud bang. A clear dent appeared on the armor. But this was not the most fatal. The vibration from the armor pushed the air inward. Under the armor, the slave's chest caved in as if something heavy had pressed down on it. If one listened carefully, they could hear the cracking of bones. Even metal armor would not be able to withstand such an attack. Xiao Xian didn't look at the slave who vomited blood and fell to the ground, nor did he have time to look. He continued to face the other people who tried to stop him. On the ground of the Wanshe tribe, the grass was not dense. Perhaps because people often walked and stepped on it, there was a lot of empty ground and the soil was exposed. At this time, because of the fierce battle, the earth on the ground was splattered all over due to the kicking, slashing, and smashing. Everyone seemed to have blended into the battlefield. Xiao Xian could hear the rapid and heavy breathing of the people around him, their chests rising and falling like the low growls of wild beasts in the forest. The weapons in everyone's hands moved quickly, breaking through the air and making a hissing sound, touching people's nerves. The sharp weapons in the hands of the soldiers swept past, bringing with them a burst of cold light that was filled with killing intent. They were barbaric and ferocious as they charged forward, bringing with them a pungent smell of blood and a dense killing intent. The ground was already dyed red with blood. His line of sight passed through the bodies of the slaves in front of him and saw the person standing there. Although more than 2 years had passed, Xiao Xian still had an impression of that person. That was the young master of the Baishe city. Xiao Xian had seen him in the stands of the Colosseum. Looking at Xiao Xian's eyes, the young master of the Baishe city was stunned. He only felt that Xiao Xian was very familiar, as if he had seen him before. But it had been too long, and many things had happened in the past 2 years, so the young master of the Baishe city couldn't remember for the time being. The young master of the Baishe city quickly searched his mind for where he had seen this person before. As Xiao Xian and his people got closer and closer, the young master of the Baishe city retreated a little more. Not far away, there were the howls and roars of the Wanshe beasts. It was the Wanshe beasts of the Wanshe tribe who were fighting with the Yanjiao beasts. The Wanshe beasts were the killing machines that were selected and cultivated by the Wanshe tribe. Before the arrival of the Yanjiao tribe, the people of the Wanshe tribe had selected the best Wanshe beasts and let them enter the mountains to fight with the beasts. Therefore, even now, in the face of the Yanjiao beasts, this group of killing machines that had been selected from generation to generation, did not know fear. Even if they hurt the enemy 100 times, they would do it. They lived to kill, and they died to kill. The Wanshe beasts always reminded the slave owners of the Colosseum city in the desert. Many of the fighting beasts in the Colosseum city were also cultivated in a similar way. It could be said that the Wanshe tribe followed the slave owners and learned this method. After escaping from the desert, the slave owners often recalled their life in the desert and the Colosseum city. Listening to the roars of the beasts, the young master of the Baishe city could not help but think of the Colosseum city in the desert. Then his whole body shook as he thought of a person. It was him. It was that kid. The young master of the Baishe city stared at the direction of Xiao Xian. He remembered. That kid was the kid who had appeared in the Colosseum city. Xiao Xian's performance in the Colosseum was still fresh in the memory of many slave owners. However, at that time, Xiao Xian was wearing a hat and his appearance was not real. Others may not recognize him, but after the Colosseum city, Dao Yu had identified him and told the Baishe young master the identity of the person in the Colosseum city. If it were other things, the young master of the Baishe city may not have such a deep impression. However, Xiao Xian had followed the group of people from Luoya city. In the eyes of the slave owners who fled the desert, Luoya city was a traitor. The desert cities were destroyed one by one, but Luoya city survived. The people of Luoya city not only lived well in the desert, but also had a larger territory. The people who destroyed Baishe city were mainly Luoya city. Luoya city was the dog of the Shi family in Rock Hill city. The Baishe young master's hatred for Luoya city was now transferred to Xiao Xian. After all, Xiao Xian used to follow the third young master of Luoya city, Su Gu. Moreover, since the Colosseum city, Baishe's luck was getting worse and worse. Not only did the king die, but the entire Baishe city did not exist for long. If he had not been prepared and escaped, the whole army would have been wiped out. The Baishe young master's eyes were fierce. He ordered the slaves around him to take out their bows and arrows. His eyes stared at Xiao Xian's position. Violent emotions gathered in his pair of hazy eyes. He took the bow in his hand, which was made of rare materials from the desert beasts, and pulled it almost into a full moon shape. All the resentment since escaping the desert was integrated into this strong bow. Perhaps the Baishur young master was not good at other things, but he was quite capable of archery. At this time, the Baishur young master had ignored everything except the target. He did not think about whether he might accidentally hurt his own people. At this time, he only had Xiao Xian in his eyes. Whoosh! With the vibration of the bowstring, the arrow spun at high speed, making a sharp whistling sound in the air. The sharp metal arrowhead broke through the air in front of it, flashing like a meteor, and went straight to Xiao Xian. The sharp whistling sound of the arrow wherever it passed, whether it was the slaves or the Yanjiao warriors who were fighting with it, they all felt like their eardrums were being scratched by someone, stinging pain. Xiao Xian was on guard when the others stared at him. He could see the general idea from the others' eyes. That undisguised killing intent passed through the chaotic crowd in front of him. Blocking the slaves who attacked from the side, Xiao Xian's eyes reflected the way the other pulled the bow. He did not dodge, his legs firmly rooted to the ground like ancient trees. The tumbling totemic power in his body surged, and his breath seemed to carry the heat of fire. With a flick of his wrist, the sword was raised, and the momentum of the arrow was fierce like a meteor. Clang! The two powerful forces collided, and the sound of the explosion was especially ear-piercing in the noisy battlefield. The arrow that hit the sword was deflected and flew to other places. Xiao Xian's sword, on the other hand, only left a shallow mark. The white stone young master finally noticed the sword in Xiao Xian's hand. It wasn't that he had never seen a sword made of metal, but the style and material were very different. In terms of forging skills, White Stone City was far inferior to the 3 desert cities of the past. White Stone City had very little contact with metal to begin with, but after the desert became chaotic, they managed to snatch some. But Xiao Xian's sword was not ordinary, and this shocked the young master. It must have been given by the Sher family of Rock Hill City. Other than that, he couldn't think of any other reason. The Yanjiao tribe was indeed a dog of the Sher family of Rock Hill City. What a bastard! Kill them for me. The white stone young master roared, and ordered the slaves to fight the Yanjiao people. He retreated a bit further to avoid the battlefield, and there were other slaves around him to protect him. The white stone young master wanted to tell the slaves to snatch Xiao Xian's sword, but before he could speak, he saw a piercing cold light flash by Xiao Xian's side. Xiao Xian sped up and charged directly at him. When the sword slashed at the metal armor, the sound of bones breaking could be heard. Then, the sharp edge of the blade cut through flesh, and blood flew up along with the broken limbs. The slaves that were kicked away were sent flying. The white stone young master didn't care if they were enemies anymore. When he saw Xiao Xian charging at him, he was so scared that his heart raced and his scalp tightened. He decisively turned around and ran as far as he could before anything else. After the chaos in the desert, the skill they learned the most was to run away. If they ran away from the battlefield, they wouldn't have to worry about that kid coming after them. They were just helping the Wanchur tribe, so they didn't need to risk everything. As he ran, he didn't forget to ask the slaves to protect him, in case someone shot at him. Xiao Xian wanted to get rid of the annoying slave master hiding behind and shooting arrows first. After that, the other slaves wouldn't have much will to fight. However, the white stone young master was running too fast. He wanted to throw a dart at him, but there were too many slaves around him. He might not be able to hit him. Seeing the white stone young master leave, Xiao Xian could only give up on that target and continue to lead his people towards the fire pit. Perhaps because of the white stone young master's departure, the slaves' will to fight wavered, giving the Yanjiao people a chance to charge forward. Other than the white stone slaves, there were slaves from other slave masters. However, those people seemed to be cannon fodder and weren't too difficult to deal with. The slave masters indeed had other intentions and weren't helping the Wanchur tribe wholeheartedly. The closer they got, the more Xiao Xian felt the rejection from the Wancher fire seed. It stimulated the totemic power in his body even more. The fire seed in his body seemed to have met its match and couldn't wait to rush over. It wasn't just the tribes that fought. Fire seeds were also incompatible with each other. They all had a sense of, there's only you and there's only me. Chapter 5:13. Beside the fire pit, the shaman stood there with a slight sneer on his face. He listened carefully to the sounds of battle but didn't move. There wasn't a single Wancher person beside him. The closest one was 50 meters away. With the Wancher fire pit as the center, there was no one but the shaman within a 50-meter radius. Inside the fire pit, a gray flame flickered. That was the color of the Wancher fire seed. The Wancher shaman was worried when he saw the fire seed in the fire pit being suppressed into a small ball. However, as the Flaming Horn's fire seed disappeared, the fire seed in the Wancher tribe's fire pit glowed again. It lost its opponent and returned to normal, just like how it was before the Flaming Horn tribe came here. This made the Wancher shaman feel less worried, and he felt more at ease. He didn't know why Yanjiao's fire seed disappeared while Yanjiao's warriors retained their original abilities. But he knew that without the suppression of Yanjiao's fire seed, Wancher's fire seed could unleash 100% of its power. What was there to fear if the Yanjiao tribe attacked? Yanjiao didn't have a fire seed, but Wancher's fire seed was still there. Wancher wasn't one of those small tribes that had to worry about survival. The power of the fire seed was the strongest. The Wancher shaman could not think of anyone who could extinguish the fire seed of Wancher, not even the slave masters. Did they want to wipe out Wancher? Yanjiao was delusional. Yanjiao had been down and out for 1,000 years. Even their thinking had become simple. Naive. If Yanjiao's fire seed was still there, he could be careful. But the Yanjiao people had dug their own graves and destroyed their fire seed. Ha ha ha. The shaman wanted to laugh. A war between the tribes was a war between fire seeds. Why didn't Yanjiao understand? Without their fire seed, how could they fight with them? As the Wancher shaman thought about it, the sneer on his face deepened. Hearing the sound, he raised his hand, and the fire seed in the fire pit behind him suddenly jumped up, swaying on its own without any wind, making banging sounds. However, it did not sound like the usual sounds, but more like the collision between rocks. When Xiao Xian finally arrived, he saw this strange scene. Different from the tight defense around the fire pit, there were less than 300 Wancher warriors here. Wancher claimed to have more than 10,000 people, but in reality, there weren't that many. Even if you counted those who couldn't fight, there were at most 7,000 or 8,000. But if you counted the slave masters and slaves, there were indeed more than 10,000 people. In addition, there were prisoners of war captured by Wancher. There were hundreds of them still alive. With more than 10,000 people, they were indeed considered a large tribe here. If Wancher hadn't gone out to attack the smaller tribes often and lost many people, they would have even more people. This time, Yanjiao sent 5,000 people to attack Wancher. Wancher had more warriors who could fight, plus the slaves of the slave masters who helped them, than Yanjiao. But at this time, if someone looked carefully, they would find that Yanjiao's casualties were much lower than Wancher's. Xiao Xian had a clear feeling when he was killing his way here. Therefore, when he saw that there were only 300 people guarding the fire pit, he was really surprised. Moreover, these 300 people weren't close to the fire pit. They had completely cleared out a large area around the fire pit. There were more than 100 Yanjiao warriors who had arrived with Xiao Xian, and more were coming. It wasn't difficult to deal with the 300 people. Among these 300 people, there were no leaders or team leaders. At most, there were 1 or 2 team leaders. But here, Xiao Xian had a strange feeling. The others also felt the strong repulsion and strangeness of the Wancher fire seed. Xiao Xian didn't rush to the fire pit immediately. He only dealt with the 3 million Wancher stone men outside. He also stopped the other Yanjiao warriors who wanted to rush forward. These 300 Wancher warriors didn't seem to want to fight Xiao Xian. After fighting for a while, they retreated to the fire pit. They didn't want to use the fire pit to improve their strength, but Xiao Xian felt that their behavior was more like luring the Yanjiao people to the fire pit. Would anyone lure people from other tribes to their own fire pit? There had to be something wrong within the 50-meter gap. Xiao Xian didn't need to say more. The other Yanjiao people could guess. Therefore, they only fought with the Wancher warriors outside the 50-meter circle. The Wancher shaman stood by the fire pit. Seeing more and more Yanjiao people gathering but not approaching, he didn't have the patience to wait any longer. A cruel smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. He raised his arm, raised his head and let out a long howl. Then, Xiao Xian heard some words that Xiao Xian did not understand. If he had heard it before, he would have thought that it was just some meaningless syllables. However, at this moment, Xiao Xian felt a strong sense of danger. Retreat! Xiao Xian shouted. Hearing Xiao Xian's words, Toa and the others paused and then retreated some distance away from the fire pit. Retreat again. Stay away. Xiao Xian continued shouting. The Yanjiao people wanted to retreat. Just now, there were too many Yanjiao people and some Wancher people who rushed over. At this time, a strange scene occurred. The Yanjiao people wanted to leave the fire pit, but the Wancher people didn't let them and kept blocking them. Bang! Bang! More and more urgent and loud sounds came from the Wancher fire pit. The grayish flame rose from the fire pit and filled it up. A column of flame suddenly shot up into the sky, like a volcanic eruption, spurting out balls of flame. The ball of fire that shot out from the pillar of fire tumbled in the air. At that moment, it seemed as if it wanted to cover the entire sky above. It carried with it the power to destroy the heavens and the earth as it came crashing down with a whistling sound. The Yanjiao people who saw this broke out in cold sweat. They were the first group of Yanjiao people to come here and were the closest to the fire pit. For the old soldiers, this was their first time attacking another tribe. For the people who came back from the other side, this was their first time attacking a tribe with a primitive fire seed. No matter which side they were from, they had never encountered such a situation before. The fire seed was too powerful. In front of this power, they felt like they were facing a king beast. No, not even a king beast would feel this much pressure. Staying there under such circumstances was simply courting death. Even if Chief Ao and Zheng Luo were here, they would run away first. The Wancher shaman standing by the fire pit grinned. The sound coming from his mouth was even louder. 50 meters? How could it only be 50 meters? That was just a facade made by the Wancher people. The power of the fire seed was far more than 50 meters. Fortunately, Xiao Xian shouted in advance. The Yanjiao people retreated quickly. The injured who could not run fast enough were carried by their companions. The others covered them as they ran. Boom boom boom. The sound of the balls of fire crashing down was like an angry roar, spreading into the distance. They were clearly just balls of fire, but when these balls of fire hit the ground, they were like heavy boulders falling to the ground. The ground trembled clearly, and in the blink of an eye, it became intense, and the earth trembled along with it. The fireballs started near the fire pit and quickly spread outwards. The fireballs were like giant rocks that fell to the ground, leaving behind a gray patch. Through these gray fireballs, one could vaguely see the shadow of the Wancher shaman standing on the other side of the fire pit. Near the fire pit, the ground was covered in a layer of gray balls of fire. A second layer was piling up. The balls of fire looked like they were going to build a towering mountain. The balls of fire fell too quickly. With the Wancher people blocking them, the first group of Yanjiao warriors could not run out of the range of the balls of fire in time. The warriors running outside could feel the pressure coming from behind. It was like a cold current was rapidly approaching. The hairs on the back of their necks stood on end. They did not look up to see what was happening, but they could feel the weight of a mountain crashing down on them. The ground felt like it was going to collapse. The impact of the foreign tribe's fire seeds still restricted the Flaming Horn warriors' mobility. It was obviously more difficult for them to run. They were panting heavily and their faces were pale. Chapter 5:14. The Wancher tribe was called Wancher because the fire seed was born in 10,000 stones. 10,000 stones formed a mountain, and the fire seed of the Wancher tribe was born in them. On the other side of the gray flames, the shaman was a blurry figure. Because of the swaying of the flames and the swirling of the air, his figure looked distorted and strange. Although he couldn't see the shaman clearly, Xiao Xian could hear the maniacal laughter coming from the fire pit. Ha ha ha! Who told you Yanjiao people to not have the fire seed? Without it, let's see how you Yanjiao people will fight me. Boom! Boom! Balls of gray flames smashed onto the ground, creating a commotion similar to that of a meteor crashing to the ground, not giving anyone any time to breathe. The third layer of flames was already being built near the fire pit. The Yanjiao warriors carrying the wounded felt their bodies quickly becoming tired. The veins on their foreheads pulsed and large drops of sweat slid down their bodies. From the beginning until now, they had run less than 100 meters. Under normal circumstances, it would have taken them only a breath. But here, at this moment, they felt like they were deeply trapped in a torrent. Every step they took was against the flow, and it was extremely difficult. The warriors on the side felt the same. They attacked fiercely, but they felt much of their strength being reduced. They felt weak and powerless. If not for the Yanjiao's strength, they would have been able to hold on for a while after being suppressed. If it had been anyone else, they would have been attacked by the Wancher people long ago. Watch out! A large ball of gray flames smashed into the people there. The gray flames in the sky covered a large area and spread too quickly. They had no time to run. Even if they avoided this one, they couldn't avoid the other balls of fire. The 10 or so warriors gathered together and could only take it head-on. Seeing the gray flames smashing down, they could only raise the weapons in their hands as if to block it. The gray flames passed through the swords, spears, axes, and rods, passed through the bodies of the warriors, and smashed into the ground with a thunderous boom. The ground under their feet trembled for a long time. Although the flames passed through the warriors' bodies and did not cause any visible damage, the Flaming Horn warriors felt like they were being crushed by a giant boulder. Their entire bodies felt like they were trapped inside, and there was a strong pressure all around them. Even their blood vessels felt like they were being crushed. Above their heads, there was even more pressure that made them panic. It was like giant boulders were falling down, and the boulders were piling up at a rapid pace. His heart felt like it was being squeezed by someone, and his heartbeat lost its usual rhythm. His lungs felt like they were frozen, and every breath he took was extremely difficult. His strength was decreasing rapidly, and the totem power in his body was like a hibernating animal encountering cold weather. He felt drowsy. The pressure was still increasing, and it was difficult for them to stand. The situation was not good. It wasn't just the Flaming Horn warriors who were trapped. Even the slave masters who were hiding in the periphery were terrified. Although they weren't trapped, the power of the fire seed terrified them. They could easily enslave a slave who didn't have any fire seed energy, but it was extremely difficult to control a warrior with awakened totemic powers. This was the power of the fire seed, and the conflict between fire seeds. The slave masters were all descendants of tribesmen with fire seeds. After a long time, they became slave masters. They also had fire seeds in their bodies. The war between fire seeds was just like the war between humans. It never subsided. Some of the slave masters who had wanted to attack the Wancher tribe when they escaped the desert were now secretly glad that they didn't do anything. If the Wancher tribe had been forced to use the power of the fire seed, they would have suffered the same fate as the Yanjiao warriors. Good thing we didn't do anything. Looks like the Yanjiao won't get away with it this time. I hope the Wanchur people can take this opportunity to destroy the Yanjiao tribe. Those who didn't think highly of the Wanchur tribe now changed their minds. A slave master on the side rolled his eyes and whispered, "Why don't we take this opportunity to help the Wanchur tribe?" The person who said this was the young master of Skywell City, who didn't think highly of the Wanchur tribe before. Now that the situation had improved, he had another idea. That makes sense. Let's go. There were others who had the same idea. They took the slaves in their hands and walked towards the battlefield. Xiao Xian was also trapped in the gray flames of the Wanchur tribe. He could clearly feel his power being suppressed, but compared to others, he was still much more flexible. Seeing more and more Yanjiao warriors being enveloped, Xiao Xian's heart skipped a beat. He shouted, "Gather together, everyone. Don't spread out too far. The more the better. The people are here, the fire seed is here. Don't be afraid." The Wanchur shaman said Yanjiao had no fire seed. How could there be no fire seed? The people were here, the fire seed was here, but it was no longer in its original form. Xiao Xian pulled the scattered Yanjiao warriors back to where the troops were gathered. He flicked away a blade and kicked the Wanchur man in the chest, kicking him away. Without stopping, he went straight to the troops gathered not far away. They were the first to follow him. Now they couldn't run out of the range of the Wanchur fire seed's flames. After hearing Xiao Xian's words, the Yanjiao warriors who had rushed out began to rush back in and gather together. Even if they ran out, they couldn't outrun the fire seed's speed. This was their first time facing such a powerful fire seed. They were inexperienced and panicked. Xiao Xian's words were like a beacon of light to them. Whether or not Xiao Xian's words were useful, their first reaction was to do as he said. After gathering, the Yanjiao warriors felt much more relaxed. The fading totemic patterns on their bodies showed up again. The fire seed's power seemed to have broken through the ice and started to recover. It worked. Yes, when they merged with the fire seed, the shaman also said that the fire seed was here as long as the people were here. At the time, they only thought it was a consolation of faith, but they didn't understand it fully. But now, they deeply understood the meaning of this sentence. The fire seed merged into their bodies and burned, never extinguished. One person's power was limited, and the fire seed was small. But when more people gathered, it was like sparks coming together to form a ball of fire. When the fire gathered together, it would become a raging inferno. Xiao Xian's words were spread. Duo Kang, Gigu, Ta and the others gathered the people around them. Ao and Zheng Luo, who rushed over later, also made arrangements for the people. The people were like disconnected dots that gradually connected. Because of the war, they didn't form a tight line or a tight circle, but they formed a battle line. As more and more people joined the battle line, under the mountainous pressure of the Wanchur fire seed, this battle line was like a red hunting knife, cutting into the enemy. The pressure from the Wanchur fire seed lessened. Even though the flames above them had accumulated to a terrifying height, the Yanjiao people had lost their fear of it. On the contrary, as the fire seed's power in their bodies became more active, their intention to fight back became more obvious. The shaman was right. In a war of this level, it was not easy to completely destroy the other side. If they really went on, it would be a battle between the fire seeds. So far, no tribe had brought their fire seed out to fight. This was one of the reasons why the Wanchur tribe was so fearless. But now, Yanjiao's actions shocked the shaman. Why? Why was there Yanjiao's fire seed's aura here? Wasn't Yanjiao's fire seed gone? It wasn't there before. Bringing the fire seed out to fight? Were the Yanjiao people crazy? Where was it? Where was Yanjiao's fire seed? The Wanchur shaman carefully sensed all the fire seed auras in his territory. However, he realized that the flaming horn fire seed's aura was everywhere in Wanchur's territory. The aura wasn't strong, but they were all connected together. The twisting lines of fire seemed to want to split this newly built mountain apart. The aura of the two fire seeds was colliding. Whether it was the Yanjiao warriors or the Wanchur warriors, or the nearby slave masters, they could all feel this change. The slave masters who had originally intended to help Wanchur found that the situation had reversed once again. Their minds were uncertain, so they temporarily suspended their actions and stayed not far from the battlefield to watch. If Wanchur continued to gain the upper hand, it would not be too late for them to make a move. Beside the fire pit, the shaman's eyes were full of disbelief. How could this be? What did the Yanjiao people do? Xiao Xian picked up an injured Yanjiao warrior who was about to die and carried him on his shoulder. The warrior's injuries weren't too serious, but he couldn't hold on under the pressure of the Wanchur fire seed. He was too far away from everyone when they were fighting the Wanchur people. When Xiao Xian told everyone to retreat, they didn't notice him and couldn't take him with them. Seeing that most of the Yanjiao people had gathered together, but Xiao Xian was the exception, the shaman came back to his senses. He glared at Xiao Xian fiercely, the gray totemic patterns making his twisted expression look even more ferocious. I don't care what you do, I'll bury you all here. You'll be crushed bones under the Wanchur volcano. A beam of fire shot out from the fire pit, gathered in the air, and smashed down on Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian felt as if there was a powerful force above his head, as if the sky was collapsing. He didn't have time to think too much, so he threw the person on his shoulder towards the direction of the group. In the next moment, an enormous pressure came crashing down like an avalanche from a tall mountain. Xiao Xian felt his muscles and bones creak under the pressure, as if he was bearing the weight of a mountain. The gray flames grew thicker, blocking out most of the light. It was as if night had fallen. Chapter 5:15. Xiao Xian. Xian, how are you? Someone shouted anxiously from the group. However, because of the dense gray flames, their vision was blocked and they could not see clearly. Especially where Xiao Xian was, it was the spot where the shaman had exerted most of his strength. Xiao Xian knew that the attack had been aimed at him. Even through the gray flames, Xiao Xian could feel the Wanchur shaman's venomous gaze on the other side of the flames. Xiao Xian was the leader of the first group to attack this place. How could the Wanchur shaman not hate him? Moreover, the Wanchur shaman had seen Xiao Xian before. In the desert, when he was still with the young master of Baishur city, he had seen Xiao Xian and Tuo. He had even helped to set up a trap to capture Tuo and Lei. However, things had developed beyond his expectations. From then on, Xiao Xian had been listed as one of the most important people to be wary of. Now that he saw Xiao Xian again, the Wanchur shaman was afraid. Since he couldn't kill those people in one go, he had to crush this extremely threatening brat first. Above them, the fireballs that had been piled up like a mountain continued to increase. In this place, the fireballs were increasing the fastest, not above the Yanjiao group, but above Xiao Xian's head. Earlier, Xiao Xian had been able to run and save a few injured people. However, now, Xiao Xian felt as if there was a mountain on top of his head. He could not even turn around, let alone walk or run. Whoosh! 2 steps away, an arrow flew in. However, because of the fire seed's flames, or because the other party could not see the target's exact location, the arrow had missed. Someone wanted to use this opportunity to kill Xiao Xian. Under the fire seed's flames and within such a killing formation, it would take a lot of effort for someone outside to shoot accurately. Xiao Xian could feel the Wanchur people approaching. They probably felt that the Yanjiao group was not easy to deal with, so they changed their target. After all, there were too many Yanjiao people there. When they gathered together, the Yanjiao fire seed's power made the Wanchur people uncomfortable. The Wanchur people could not see Xiao Xian's situation clearly, but they could feel that there was someone not from the Wanchur tribe here. Who else could they attack but him? Realizing the situation, Xiao Xian knew he could not wait any longer. He moved his arms with all his might, trying to break free from this almost frozen feeling. Here, other than the immense pressure from above, Xiao Xian felt the same as when he first met the king's stoneworm. It was as if every part of his body was turning into stone, out of his control. If he could not break through this resistance, he would die. Xiao Xian could feel the Yanjiao group trying to get closer. If it was just one or a few people, they would not be able to save him because they could not withstand the Wancher fire seed's power. But with so many people and the Wancher people blocking them, they would move slower. Xiao Xian could not wait. Just as Xiao Xian expected, Tua and the others also wanted to help Xiao Xian. However, as soon as they left the group, they would feel immense pressure. Forget about saving Xiao Xian, it would be difficult for them to get over safely. The closer they got to Xiao Xian, the greater the resistance. The Wancher fire seed's power that the shaman added to Xiao Xian was stronger than anywhere else. If they wanted to get over, they could either move slowly or wait for others to arrive. With enough people, they could fight against the Wancher fire seed. But time waits for no one. Xiao Xian breathed hard, every nerve in his body conveying a sense of urgency. He desperately wanted to break through this resistance. The totemic power in his body was pushed to the limit. His body creaked, like a rusty gear finally starting to turn. In his mind, the totemic flames burned fiercely. But this power was not enough, far from enough. Outside the totemic flames, a faint white light shone. The light grew stronger quickly, even overshadowing the light of the totemic flames inside. Xiao Xian could not see through the egg-shaped light shield to see what the totemic flames inside looked like. If not for the red totemic power and blue power of inheritance extending from inside, Xiao Xian would have thought that the totemic flames were blocked off. Inside the egg-shaped light shield, threads of white light extended out along with the totemic power and the power of inheritance. They rushed to every part of his body like a torrent. As the energy surged into his body, his frozen and petrified blood seemed to be melting and boiling. His strength gradually recovered, and all the muscles in his body vibrated at a high frequency. His arm, which was holding the sword, was raised again with a creaking sound. Red flames shot out from Xiao Xian's body. This time, it did not come from the bone ornament he was wearing. The bone ornament seemed to have fallen into a deep sleep after the broken sea incident. Xiao Xian had not used the bone ornament's power for a long time. Now, the flames that shot out came from the surface of Xiao Xian's body. They had nothing to do with the bone ornament. And in more than one place, surrounded by the dark gray flames, they emitted a different light. More and more flames shot out. The flames grew bigger and bigger, enveloping Xiao Xian entirely. The pressure around him was as heavy as a rock. It came from above and around him. All the pressure was being pushed away. At first, it was just a small fluctuation. But soon, the fluctuation became bigger and the pushing force became stronger. The flames on Xiao Xian's body grew stronger. Faster. Just a little faster. As the flames rolled, Xiao Xian felt like every pore in his body was erupting with a heroic spirit. It wanted to push away all the obstacles around him. Break. 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 Crack, a sound like the cracking of a rock suddenly rang out. Crack, 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 the cracking sound grew louder and louder. It began to come from everywhere around him. The obstacles were gradually pushed away. The pressure in all directions was weakening. His body was becoming less tired. Cracks appeared on the ground under his feet. When the flames pressed down from above, there were no footprints on the ground. But now, as the pressure from above weakened, there was a dent in the ground. This was caused by Xiao Xian's explosive strength. His slowed heartbeat sped up. Xiao Xian took a deep breath, as if to expel all the pressure. Then he inhaled sharply and let out a long roar. Following the roar, the flames on Xiao Xian's body surged wildly. They pierced through the gray flames surrounding him like a fire dragon breaking free of its shackles. Without turning around, Xiao Xian swung his arm. The blade reflecting the flames swept out. The tip of the sword was 2 palms away from the 3 Wancher people. But the sword aura was as sharp as a blade, easily cutting their throats. After attacking Xiao Xian, the Wancher shaman had wanted to wait for Xiao Xian to be crushed to death by the Wancher fire seed's power. Then he would focus the fire seed's power on the others. But as he waited, he realized something was wrong. A drop of sweat dripped from his forehead. The shaman stared at Xiao Xian. At this time, Xiao Xian looked up. The shaman seemed to see through the layers of flames and saw Xiao Xian's shining eyes. "Stop him! Stop him!" The shaman's terrified voice was piercing and piercing. It spread everywhere. At this time, no one cared about the shaman's voice. They were confused. What had happened to make the shaman so terrified? Something happened to the fire pit? The scattered Wancher people gathered in the direction of the shaman's voice. Xiao Xian stepped forward. His step made a thud on the ground. It was comparable to the sound of the Wancher fire seed's fireball crashing down. After getting rid of his exhaustion, Xiao Xian felt as if his body was filled with endless energy. With every step he took, that energy doubled. His steps gradually sped up, but his footsteps became lighter and lighter. The sound of his footsteps weakened, and each step he left on the ground was shallower than the previous one. Until there were no footprints left, and only the soft rustling of the short grass on the ground could be heard. He swung his sword. It broke through the layers of gray flames and pierced the chest of a Wancher man who was about to shoot an arrow. Xiao Xian was still approaching Wancher's fire pit, faster and faster. The Wancher people who rushed over could not stop him in time. When they got close, they could feel a strong repulsive force. It was like another tribe's fire seed was burning here. The Wancher shaman felt like he was facing a ferocious beast that had gone berserk with flames all over its body. Why was Xiao Xian able to break through the fire seed's suppression? Why was Xiao Xian able to move freely under the fire seed's suppression? The shaman did not want to think about it now. His mind was clouded by a possibility that he did not want to think about. This thought made him feel like he had fallen into an ice cave. At this moment, the Wancher shaman regretted not arranging more guards here. Then he realized with a start that he was doubting the fire seed of his tribe. Could the fire seed stop this person? This time, he lost his confidence. Even the guards could not stop Xiao Xian. Xiao Xian was too fast. The shaman's vision was not affected by the gray flames. At this moment, all the gray flames in his vision faded. Everything around him became clear. There seemed to be a voice in his head telling him what to do. The shaman watched as Xiao Xian approached. He thought Xiao Xian's target was him. However, just as he was about to die, he realized that Xiao Xian had jumped 10 steps away from him. He jumped over his head and charged towards the fire pit behind him. The shaman's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He could not believe that this person's target was the fire seed. He wanted to destroy the fire seed all by himself. Lunatic. This was a lunatic. If Yanjiao's fire seed was here, it might be possible. However, he was the only one here. Could he represent Yanjiao's fire seed? The shaman had never heard of anyone who could fight a large tribe's fire seed alone. Jumping in meant death. But soon, the shaman felt a pressure that made his heart stop beating. It pressed down from above and made him collapse on the ground. Xiao Xian jumped into the air and raised his hand to slap at the flames spewing out from the fire pit. His palm passed through the gray flames as if it was brushing against cold rocks. This palm seemed to be infinitely enlarged. It felt as if the palm could cover the entire fire pit. Under this palm, it was like another world. There seemed to be electricity flashing under the palm. It was like a flash of light from the collision of clouds under the endless sky. Every time this palm pressed down, a portion of the gray flame mountain formed by the 10,000 stone stacks would crumble. The cracked gray flames exploded like rolling thunder. The air surged wildly like an avalanche sweeping down from the top of a mountain, setting off a deafening roar. The towering mountain that was unshakable like a giant trembled and collapsed. Everyone in the Wanchur tribe could feel this shocking change. At this moment, everyone who was fighting stopped what they were doing and tensed up to feel this change. In Xiao Xian's mind, the white light shield grew brighter. An unparalleled power was suddenly released. His palm pressed down again with the power to destroy the world. The battle of the tribes, the struggle for the fire seed, the battle of life and death. The other's despair, my glory. From now on, there would be no more Wanchur. Yanjiao would return to the peak. Destroy, for me. Rumble. The mountain collapsed as if the world was splitting apart. The deafening roar of splitting mountains and splitting rocks was deafening, and even the air seemed to be continuously exploding. The wind blew wildly as if to kill everything. The mountain that the Wanchur people thought was indestructible, the sturdiest and most reliable guard, the most powerful mountain of fire seeds, was heading towards its end, just like their crumbling faith. The sound shook the heavens and the earth. It was as if waves had been set off. Wave after wave, it spread far and wide. Even the people who had taken refuge in the forest could hear it clearly. In the lush forest, flocks of birds flew away in fright. Beasts roared and ran further away. When the roar finally subsided, the gray mountain of fire above the Wanchur tribe had disappeared. Like a thick fog being blown away, everything became clear. Yangguang at noon was dazzling. The warm light shone on the earth. However, in such a lively and noisy world, it seemed to be frozen. Everything was silent. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.